Okay, awesome. So I'll just call to order a work session of the Planning Commission. And I guess that's it. We go right into talking about ADUs. So the whole point of today was just to just take a step forward on accessory dwelling units and find out where we all stand and how to maybe proceed with this, or if to proceed with this. The accessory dwelling units kind of came out of that Northwest area plan. There were one or two things that kind of stuck with the board, and a number of the residents, and ADUs was one of the big ones. And the mayor's interested in it, and board members were interested in having us move forward with it. So I think today is just kind of talking that through, and maybe look at what was it, Golden, and there's a bunch of cities that have it, but Stephen, you'd shared Golden with all of us. Is it? And then I don't know if anybody got those books or took a look at the ADU book that had some interesting things in it about what some government options are, as well as what building options are and things like that. But do you want to go over maybe the Golden one?
Yeah, I prepared a few slides if you guys want to go through it, just to serve as a refresher for everybody and kind of help set the conversation. So let me share my screen.
Yeah, and like Stephen, I mean, the Golden one seems to be pretty comprehensive, as Stephen had pointed out. So maybe that's a good starting point, for everyone in terms of see what you like from there, what you don't, and then I'll just kind of continue taking notes on what you guys all want, and I'll start working on a draft.
So is the goal tonight just to kind of set the parameters for a draft ordinance? I'd like to have that be our goal, that we actually, I think it's pretty clear from my opinion, unless others disagree, we're all interested in advancing this. So I would love to see the components of a draft ordinance at the end of the night.
I'm game for that. If that's where people are, that would be great.
Is that, can someone just refresh me? Is that like within the guidelines of what we've been given? I mean, do we have that authority to draft an ordinance and all that?
So you would have to, propose. So tonight we can't act on anything because we just set the meeting up for a work session. Yep. But we'll need to provide Dan direction with what we want included in that ordinance and the details, and kind of flesh this out a little bit more. So that was the intent of this work session. If we get through, we're able to give Dan enough information tonight, then, we could come back and schedule a meeting for October to actually act on it. And then we'll be making a recommendation to the board to adopt an ordinance, and the board will then provide direction as to whether or not they, agree or, want things tweaked or have questions or, whatever they decide to do. But that would give the board the authority to act. Basically we're making a recommendation of the board would have to adopt the ordinance, and then it would then staff would need to, kind of make the code changes and stuff like that in order to get it operational.
Got it. Thank you.
And there's a bit of work that would have to be done in our, with our existing code and the language, in addition to whatever draft we come up with, from Golden or wherever.
Right.
I remember looking through it. There's just, it seemed like there were some other areas that would get impacted. So.
Correct.
We may have to go back and forth even with us and staff a little bit as well. But, all right, Stephen, you're sharing?
Oh yeah, I'm sharing. So let me I'll just take this to full screen real fast. All right, so as Bob mentioned.
Can't see.
Can't see it?
Sharing.
We're just seeing a blank screen.
Really? Huh. Wonder why it says, okay. It says it's paused for some reason. Resume share. Huh.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Nope. Is that working now?
No, it's good again. No, now we're
again.
Edit.
Let's try it one more time. Can you see it now?
No, just you.
How weird. Let me try to make it a PDF, I guess, if it's not working as a. Wonder why it's not sharing my screen.
Yeah, it shouldn't matter. Or you can just share the app too.
Did the person who set up the meeting give you the authority to share?
Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right, good. I will leave it at close to this size and see whether or not I can can you see it all right? Is it big enough, or do you want me to go full screen again and
This is
risk
fine.
losing it? This is fine? Okay. So as Chairman McCool mentioned, this all started with the Northwest area plan kind of discussion. So this is how the original, I went through some of those documents just to kind of provide myself a refresher and help set the tone. But some of the questions that Clarion asked were, where this would be appropriate, whether or not it's appropriate in medium density only, or if it's in, residential low density, if it's in both districts, not sure, no opinion. They also kind of helped couch that conversation in terms of, whether or not we want a size restriction. Typically those sizes are, around 700, 800 square feet. Whether or not you want to stipulate the location on the property, the scale in relation to the primary dwelling, and then occupancy is another thing. And by occupancy, what they mean is whether or not the owner has to live on site. So if you don't have an owner restriction that lives on the property, it could just turn into more rental units, double the rental units within town versus having it be, something that is supposed to help the resident that lives in town and the owner that lives in town. So really some of the questions that I'd like Dan to have some direction on is, and myself to have some direction on and helping work on this is, why we're doing it and what the goal is, whether or not that's to help people, age in place, whether or not that's to create affordable housing, those type of, is it everything, or is it, what's the primary motivator, or what are the primary motivators? So certain things that we also discussed, but that was kind of also in the context of design guidelines, was whether or not the design needed to be similar to the primary dwelling. So without design restrictions to the primary dwelling, I think you could still tie it to, it needs to be of the same, color and style or something like that. But, we also may not have an opinion. You don't necessarily have to have that type of restriction on these units. So, and then whether or not they're detached or attached is another kind of primary question. So one of the key things that differentiates low density residential from medium density residential is whether or not you can have a duplex. And so unless you add a size restriction to kind of really differentiate the primary dwelling from the accessory dwelling, we have residences in town that are around 1,000 square feet, sometimes even smaller. So if you allow a 700 square foot house to have a 700 square foot accessory dwelling unit, then you're basically creating a duplex situation. So in some cases, or if there is a desire, you could have it be, accessory, and have it be some degree smaller than the primary residence in order to ensure that it's an accessory unit versus something that's equal to or even larger than the primary unit. So those are some of the questions that the Clarion helped frame. This is the answer that we had at one point. So again, I think this was from the summer of 2018 that these results came in. And as we all, those of us that participated in this all remember probably that, the dial kind of moved to some degree on all of these conversations as, the public that participated got more aware of, what we were talking about and got more comfortable with the terms and what they meant and what restrictions would be in place and all that stuff. But as I think everybody kind of remembers, and as Bob mentioned again, there was more support for accessory dwelling units than there were for a lot of other things that we discussed through the Northwest area planning effort. This one showed that 35% showed support, 21% didn't support, and then 37% were kind of not sure. But then again, some additional discussion items involved whether or not you require an additional off-street parking space for an affordable unit or accessory unit, excuse me, whether or not it is to address affordable housing, talking about impacts, again, most of that I think is related to parking. There's not going to be probably a significant impact on schools with an accessory dwelling unit as they're traditionally defined, as a smaller kind of one bedroom, one unit home. And then whether or not there's anything on lot restrictions in terms of the size of the lot that could allow it, or the floor area coverage type of thing. And then this is just a general summary of some of the comments that, and it kind of is reflective of, we got a range of things from everyone should be allowed to have an ADU unit in original town to I don't support them anywhere type of thing. This is just an example. So I don't know if you want me to read through some of them. But, some people didn't even feel like we should be looking at original town exclusively. Others felt that, it was critical to emphasize protecting original town. And then we were all over the board on comments on whether or not ADU units. Some were concerned about density and that type of impact. Others were, a lot of it was, I think that we also had some comments that were, that bridged, our discussion of introducing housing on or within Superior Marketplace. So we had some comments that we just don't want more housing. That's not what Superior needs. So they weren't supportive of ADU units either. Again, like in the relation to density, fewer people, they didn't support the ADUs in that comment. But the benefits, of course, affordable housing, as we've already mentioned, homes for, special needs, adults or aging in place, helping growing the older population, and then, things to consider too, lot sizes. And then there were a handful of comments against not allowing them at all. And then getting into the golden regulations, if you guys have any questions or want to discuss anything as I go, feel free to interrupt me. This is pretty loose. Going through the golden regulations, I thought that they had a pretty good website, and they've been doing it a while, so they're fairly dialed in. They define them as any of these options, whether or not it's an attached structure or attached to the primary structure, detached, whether or not it could be like a second floor. In this case, it looks like a third floor addition, whether or not it could be a basement conversion or a garage conversion or something that gets set, above a detached garage. Golden also goes to the extent to clarifying why they include them. So they do it for the additional housing options and, to kind of limit the housing stock that's already there, kind of to create housing in an area where you're not actually creating a new subdivision type of thing. It's also done for more affordability, and it allows some folks, extra income for those homeowners. So when we have rising property taxes and stuff like that, or, in original town, we have a lot of pressure for development, and those home prices are going up and up because of the adjacent new development. This is a nice option in order to allow for, or could be a nice option to allow for existing residents to have additional income. Let's see. So this is the steps that Golden kind of put in place. They do require the principal or the property owner to occupy either the principal dwelling or the accessory dwelling unit. And the allowance for the principal property owner or the primary property owner to do the accessory dwelling unit is if somebody downsizes. So if all the kids have left and, or if you're a single individual and you want to rent out a larger home, you just don't need that size anymore. You could build an accessory dwelling unit, not have to actually move, and then rent the larger space and actually get more income than renting the smaller one.
Hey, Stephen.
Yeah.
One quick question. It was interesting to me that they limited this to 3 people or less. Is that typical in ADUs to put a cap on the number of people who can be in one?
Well, I think that's also another measure to control the impact. So yeah. I think we have a definition of family that's 3 unrelated people. We don't set a definition of family. So I think that this is going above and beyond, so you wouldn't be able to rent an accessory dwelling unit out that's 700 square feet to a family of 6. That definitely has a different impact than having, and even 3 seems like a lot for a 700 to 800 square foot structure. But 3, a family of 2 and a child, might survive with 1 car. But that's typically the requirement that you put 1 car per accessory dwelling unit too. So it's just a way to help control the impacts that are also associated with having accessory dwelling units. But that I think is fairly unique, but it's not a bad additional layer to consider.
Yeah, I actually liked it, whether 3 is the right number. I liked the idea of not overcrowding, I guess, because of what you said. So. Yep.
Did somebody else also have a question? I thought I was getting.
Yeah, this is Ben. A question about the owner. So I understand the owner has to be there when the ADU is being built and occupying either the primary or the ADU. But let's say he moves and starts renting out his house. What happens to the ADU at that point under the golden regulations?
I don't know about under the golden regulations, but you can have provisions where they sign some sort of affidavit or something where they would actually have to come back and what's the word? They decommission the unit so that it actually, so you'd have to take the kitchen out, or you could still have it be finished space, but you couldn't have it actually be an accessory dwelling unit and used as a dwelling unit. So it could go from, you know, the garage conversion to just like where it has all the amenities that allow it to be a unit to not to just being a, you know, a study that's detached from the regular home or something. So it depends on how it's built to begin with, but it basically gets decommissioned so that it's not an accessory dwelling unit. It doesn't meet the definition, which we'd have to define and add to our code.
Golden puts, sorry.
Go ahead.
Golden puts deed restrictions in which say if the owner moves out, they have to decommission it.
Yeah, you also could do like an annual kind of recertification where every year they have to kind of come in, and that way it's a good refresher of the rules. And I think there's probably a few different ways. Part of it's communicating it, I think, to the property owner, and then just making sure the rules are being complied with over time. I like a deed restriction on it, though. To me, I think that makes it really clear if it changes hands, what the rules are.
Right, because it doesn't necessarily run with that one property owner. It could be they sell the house. It doesn't mean you can never sell your house. It just means it can only get used that way. So, and then really that depends on the regulation. So the regulation would be, you know, we would need that if it's owner occupied. If it's not owner occupied, then there's no real need for an additional regulation there. But if our drive is owner occupancy, then that deed would run with the land and it would transfer with ownership. They couldn't use it. I mean, they could use it for a family of one, but really the restriction is that they can't rent out both pieces. It can't turn into two rentals on one property, essentially.
Steve, you mentioned that did the Superior have a restriction on the number of unrelated people who can live in one house?
They do have a family definition, so it's either if you're a family, there's no number, but then if you're not a family, then it is. I think it's 3 or fewer that can live in one unit.
So you can't get 6 students renting a large house at the moment or anything like that.
You're not supposed to.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't enforce it.
It is, I mean, and this is another thing that would be kind of tricky to enforce. A lot of it would be, you know, based on public outreach. Like, you know, we're not going to know what's going on inside of a resident, just like we don't know what's going on inside, you know, my residence or your residence. But if the neighbors know that you're only supposed to have 2 or fewer, or 3 or fewer, or whatever, and it's not getting used that way, then they would need to be, you know, help service the police in order to allow it. So
sorry, that doesn't work either. Been down that road a couple times, and I think that's worthy of a discussion here, because we're you know, there are a lot of people who are already doing accessory dwelling units. There's so many code violations in this town that even can't be enforced by a resident complaining. And we've been told by the police they're not allowed to go. They can't take a resident's word and go knock on a door and, you know, ask for driver's licenses to prove it. They won't.
It is, yeah, I think that is hard to regulate. I think that the easier things to regulate are the physical things, like number of cars on a lot, number of parking spaces required, right? So I think from a city resource perspective, the more we can kind of mitigate against the actual impact and less on number of people, just for kind of hopefully actually good outcomes. Sorry. That would probably be my thinking on that.
yeah, and like this is maybe going to be more iterative, you know, where we identify the things that we still need to look into more, and that might be one of them. But you know, that would probably take, you know, Golden being able to, you know, give us some response as to how that gets enforced or whether or not it gets enforced. But it is a tricky thing. I think you could make the argument too that, that the rules get broken maybe more often because we don't have a path for them to be compliant this way. So I don't know. There is a provision in one of these ones that I looked at, I think out of California, that was, how do you bring those ones that are existing into compliance once you adopt an ordinance? So there are toolkits in place and, discussion forums and stuff, probably for every type of iteration of this, and every thing that we could. I mean, we're not going to be reinventing the wheel here. There'll be people or jurisdictions that have addressed these issues. It's just a matter of, can't look at everything and have an answer for everything without knowing what we, the first step and how we want to approach this. So, our first steps, I guess. So, but no, those are great questions, and that's the kind of conversation that we need, and identifying all these things, because it is a big thing, and to some degree we'll probably put something in place and make some changes or adopt some additional regulations to help control it as we go, as we learn, but and I don't know whether or not Dan has any experience on the regulation or enforcement part of that, but he's welcome to chime in at any point too.
No, I think probably the discussion that we're having, I think it probably, yeah, it does become kind of difficult to enforce something that's going to a house, but like Commissioner Ritchie said, it's probably something where, if you see multiple cars at a house over a long period of time, then that's something that, you call the town about, and there'd be some kind of code enforcement. I mean, I think in terms of bringing other properties into compliance, obviously we can't enact a code that makes it mandatory, for those to kind of follow, but we can kind of give them an incentive, that if they come into compliance with the code. I guess I'd have to kind of look at what would be kind of a good incentive.
Durango did a lot of work on that when they adopted their ADU ordinance.
Yeah.
They had kind of okay, you have 6 months to apply and bring it in before we're gonna, kind of go out there and do code enforcement. So I think, if I remember right, Durango had a pretty solid program. Granted, they had dozens and dozens of illegal ADUs, where I don't know, I think our circumstance might be a little different, but I think that there's probably good examples out there.
Yeah, and certainly I can take a look at, if that's kind of a concern that we want to look into. I'll see what, how Durango has dealt with it. I mean, we have, I think, a couple clients that have done these ADUs, so
yeah,
we've kind of learned, and I can talk to other attorneys in my office about what kind of has worked, what hasn't worked, and we probably have, an idea of, provisions that would be helpful to the town.
Great.
Just for clarification, are we talking about ADUs throughout Superior, or are we focusing on original town?
I'd be open to the entire town. I think at a minimum, I think the board is interested in original town. Not sure how everyone else feels about the rest of town.
Yeah,
the HOAs have ability to not allow, so I don't know if it's worth our time if there's not interest at the HOA level.
Yeah, and if we did do it, are we dealing with the PDs, and we have to go through?
So that's a question that we'll need to look into too. One of the questions I identified was if we allow it, and typically how our codes are, like even the plan developments kind of read, is that if the plan development's silent on something, then it defaults to the code. So if the intent is for us to just allow it in original town, we're going to need to be specific that it's only allowed in certain zone districts, so RL or RM, to limit that to a certain area. If it's intended to be broader, and if it's not restricted, it's allowed type of thing, then it would need to be written differently. So it's a good question, and that's really for your guys to provide your recommendation on. So the other thing, it's more of an aside, but the other thing that Golden has, they have I think it's a 1% growth policy. So that's that residential allocation application that you see, is that they actually track the number of units that they have throughout town, and they're only allowed to grow by 1% every year. So you if you're not in like the first 72 permits or whatever it is per year, then you get put into this program to get on the waiting list for the next year, it sounds like. I didn't delve too far into that, but that's another nuance.
We'd get 2/3 of an ADU in Old Town every year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that we need to cap it.
Yeah, no, I mean, they just, they basically, well, I guess the context is they consider an ADU another unit regardless of how small it is. So they treat it more like a single family home. So
yeah, so any residential, they have a growth cap.
Yep. So
Gotcha.
And then
Sorry, just a question. I think Boulder has a similar cap in principle, or not?
They have growth boundaries. I don't know that they actually have a growth cap in terms of units like Golden does, but I could be wrong.
Oh, look, I've got it. Got a link to it here. Oh, I lied. I got a 404. Never mind.
I think Boulder might have like radiuses, although they just, I think, have been amending their code, but I feel like they might have like, you can only have so many ADUs within a certain radius of each other in order to maybe limit the number in any given area. I can't remember which communities have some.
Boulder might certainly reduce or limit ADU allowances per year. I thought that the question was whether or not they limited residential growth in general, and I don't believe they do.
Gotcha.
But we can look into that as well. So basically, Golden just limits it to those zone districts. They have R1, R2, and R3. And then they also limit it on lot coverage. So they can't exceed 10% of the lot area. So if it's a 7,000 square foot lot, that would obviously be 700 square feet of accessory dwelling units in terms of lot coverage if it was a one-story building. And then it must follow, they have certain frontages, setbacks, and design criteria that are established. So when I worked at Boulder County, they allowed accessory dwelling units for specific uses, like if there was a medical need or a family aging type of thing. They also allowed them, I think, for if it was a farm and they needed some sort of working staff on, they would allow a second dwelling unit. So there were certain criteria, but as far as design criteria went, they didn't want the house to look like a duplex. So the primary access to the accessory dwelling unit wasn't visible from the road. Those are the types of design criteria that one could apply, should they feel like it's important or relevant. And then let's see. So this is internal. Again, like if we decide to do it, where it's not a detached building, we'll have to look at those code requirements a little bit differently in terms of building code and how we distinguish it from being a duplex versus a accessory dwelling unit. So this is, again, that same type of issue, step forward with basement finishes, things that are done internally. You have to have, it's just how it gets defined. So they define it as a stovetop and kitchen in tandem with a full bedroom and full bathroom and bedroom. So there's living, cooking, and then bathing facilities within a unit in order to kind of define what makes it another dwelling unit. So then they actually talk about like whether or not what gets excluded. So if you were to take out the stovetop, that would be how you can decommission that unit from being an accessory dwelling unit in the future. And then detached ones, this is a building code type of issue. If you were to build a new residential unit in town of any size, I believe, you would actually have to trigger a sprinkler requirement. So if you did it in a basement, it wouldn't be sprinklered because it's part of the existing structure already. But if it was and there are some life safety things that are also associated with that. So it's also important to understand the kind of teeth that you have. It would be easier for somebody to obviously finish out a basement and create an accessory dwelling unit. Again, that's a little bit more akin to a duplex. And then how do you control square footage? If you have a 2,000 square foot home and it's 1,000 square feet downstairs and 1,000 square feet upstairs, it's a lot harder to control how somebody demises, or you get a building permit, it says it's 700 square feet, but if they're really getting the basement area, I don't know how you control the full use or the full square footage as easily as you might if it's a brand new build or a separate unit. And then so again, kind of going back to the golden thing, but just some basic questions: how to define the accessory dwelling unit, and that's just kind of what we were discussed. And then, but I think really the first question that we need to answer is what is the intent? Why should they be allowed? What are we aiming to do? Is it an affordable housing thing? Is it to allow residents in original town to gain additional income? And are we seeing a trend where folks have to move because of rising home prices, or is it maybe not a trend, but a concern that we have? Is it to create more affordable housing options in town? So, really once we have that direction, then we can start looking at, other concerns and whether or not owner occupancy is a tool. And the other thing about owner occupancy is that, I think it becomes less of a concern for folks if somebody has a rental on their property and they're there to manage it. If they just own the property and have 2 rentals, then it's less likely that, the lawn gets mowed. That's kind of the perception, or that there's noise or additional offsite impacts that might occur, because they would occur to the property owner just like they would occur to the neighbor if they're actually living there. So one of the websites I found, this is another insert at the bottom that just says that key benefits are, maintain the look and feel of an existing neighborhood while adding more housing variety and choices. They don't require a significant capital income, and this is something we also discussed in terms of, whether or not we want to have a separate, water and sewer tap applied to this, or whether or not you want to make it easier and allow them to use the existing tap for the home, because that is a financial kind of restriction for everyone to be able to do that. Those tap fees do add up. But they can provide a more affordable housing option. I think that there are elements, again, where you could do, some places in California do deed restrictions. So if you allow it to happen, it's a deed restriction type of thing that's on the property, and they actually do a rent control on that affordable or on that accessory unit in order to ensure that, it's not rented at a high price and that it serves the purpose that it's set out to. So what regulations, will make these things to be appropriate for original town? The parking requirement, something we'll need direction on. The size limit, whether or not it's a certain size. I guess if we're concerned about the trick with size is, I think 700, 800 square feet is kind of the norm. I don't know that you'd want to go much less than that. If we have a existing residence that's only 800 square feet to begin with, maybe it's 700 to 800 square feet, or 25% less than the existing home, or some percentage of the size of the existing home, in order for it to actually still be accessory and not equal to or greater than the primary resident. I guess the other option that you could actually think of is that somebody has a 700 square foot home. They want that to be the accessory dwelling unit, and then they want to add a 2,000 square foot building as their primary residence. And, is that something that definitely has more of an impact on the character of original town than adding a 700 square foot home to, a 1,200, a home that has a 1,200 square foot building on it. So those are just the kind of things you want to, I guess, be mindful of and think through as you apply to this stuff. We talked about fire sprinkling already, and then the water and sewer tap fee. So just a few things, we've kind of discussed this too. Which districts would they be applied to? How would we apply them to PD zoning, or would we? And then some community considerations, setback requirements. Right now, we have setback requirements that are intended for a primary structure. If these things are supposed to be accessory and not have an impact on the character of the neighborhood, maybe they need to go in backyards, in which case they wouldn't have the same front setback requirement as the primary unit. So we might need to look at, specific setback requirements or location requirements in relation to the primary unit in order for them to be truly accessory. So it's, in California, they've kind of gone into the whole extent of whether or not they actually need a covered parking spot or anything like that. And they're saying that they don't want that to be a restriction, that it should be allowed as a setback, or a tandem garage, even if it's needed, and it can be kind of just, on-site surface parking. So So a key consideration, like you guys identified already, is how to address the second units that are already pre-existing and installed illegally. One of the, it is difficult. It's much more straightforward to get a permit and then build it than they have to go back and permit something that's been built, because if it didn't get built to code, didn't get a building permit to begin with, that's a hard thing to get people to come in, so the incentives may be, waive building fees or, something, because they're going to have to potentially like even open up walls in order to check electrical that got installed and stuff like that. But those are things that we would need to research some more. Oh, and the other big thing is that short-term rental. So, I don't think it's intended to provide somebody with an opportunity for an Airbnb or anything like that. So, but that's something that if that's if that's a concern folks have, or if it's fine, you don't care how they use it, it's the intent is to get some extra income, great. But if it's not something you want to have somebody rent out to somebody else, 30 different, individuals throughout the course of a month or whatever, potentially, then you'll want to add a restriction that says that you have to have a lease of a minimum of 30 days or something like that to control the Airbnb potential. And then again, we kind of hit this at the front, but we'll eventually get to the point where we can make a formal recommendation to the town board. Need to provide Dan with the direction to provide, to actually draft adoptable ordinance. And then, we have options to schedule additional work sessions or to schedule a public meeting for which we can actually act on this and make a formal recommendation. And then the board can do, what they want, at that point in terms of whether or not they adopt it, make any changes, kind of ask for additional information from PC, or just act on the application as it is. But it has been a little bit of time since we last discussed this, more broadly with the public. So there's an potential, I guess, for more public process to be requested. But I think that the town manager's position on this is to make some recommendation to the board and get direction rather than spend a lot of time going down one path without getting that direction. And then we'd rather have something for them to respond to than to work on something again that we've already spent a decent amount of time on. So that's all I have for now. That was just really to kind of set the tone and get you guys going with thoughts and ideas and direction to provide back to Dan and I.
Stephen?
Yes, sir.
What's the current situation with respect to Airbnb in the town?
That's a good question. I don't know if Dan knows the answer to that. We don't have like a formal allowance process or an application process for them to come in and get approved for them. So, and I don't know whether or not we have official restrictions on them either. I don't know of any that we have on the books. So Dan, do you have an answer on that?
I don't, to tell you the truth. No, I haven't. I'd have to take a look.
I'm pretty sure it's not defined. At least I've never seen it. I think it's just undefined.
I've asked the question and I've gotten the answer. I'm just not remembering right now. I'll text Martin and see what he can tell me.
So a couple of things, getting back to why we want to do this, I think that's a really good place to start. And I'm gun shy, and some of you may be as well, about drafting some ordinance that looks like anything official without some reasonable direction from the board. We get our hopes up, we think we have something cool, and then it just gets shut down because it looks like an ordinance. I don't know if it makes sense to maybe try to come up with what we think the answers to some of these questions are, or maybe what some of the options are to some of the questions, and see if we can get, some hand raises from the board on what they're thinking, because, this can be addressed a lot of different ways. It can be crazy tight restrictions that will basically make it so nobody does it because it'll be too much and it won't be worthwhile. It could be the other extreme, which is do whatever the heck you want, and we're gonna take everybody's. I mean, there's probably 20 of them in this town already, and we're just gonna let you have them, or more than likely it'll fall somewhere, in the middle. But I don't know if it'll lean towards the restrictive side or the loose side, right? Or the lower, least restrictive side. So I don't know what other people's thoughts are. I'm a little nervous about, coming up with a draft ordinance without a little bit, with at least some direction from the board. But
What would that look like? Like a work session together?
oh, that would be awesome if they would do that. I would say that would be best case. The only other option would be to get an agenda item where we, can just have that discussion, with the board in a public meeting. So that, and I don't know if it needs to be a public item, but if we could have planning commissioners there and see if they'll give us feedback in a meeting. But I think the work session would be better if they'll do it. But I'd like to be, I also don't want to go in there and say, what do you want? Because then we're going to have 2 hours of this, what we're going to go through and not get anywhere. If we had some thoughtful questions, directions, goals with options that we think are reasonable to consider, and just try to get some tick marks, on what's good and what's not, just so when this thing does get written, there's a better chance that it'll, get implemented. Or shut us down early if they don't want to deal with it. So, which I think that needs to be asked as well, because.
Well, I mean, I guess I think I totally understand your position. I think the direction I got from the manager's office today is to try to get that. I think the recommendation is probably going to be best in terms of we've gotten some direction from them before. There was a work session that we had after the Northwest planning effort didn't get approved. I know there was some frustration at that time, but the direction was that there were elements that they thought were worth working on, and this was one of them. So I do think that there's some support from certain members of the board. And again, this is something we haven't taken their temperature on recently, so I can see both sides of this argument. But I guess I would think that, especially within the context of we have an election season coming up, so I don't know whether or not we're going to get an official position from this board or how much that even matters until we have the new board in place after November.
I don't think we're not going to pull this together tonight, that
right.
Likely. And I mean, it's, if we get a new board in place, then, maybe we not table it, but just work through this. I mean, I can already tell by the way you're presenting it and the way people are responding, we got stuff to talk about, right? So, I think it's going to take us, a couple, 3 meetings probably to come to grips on what we think is right. Maybe even get some public input if we can. And then when the new board's in place and, early next year, I wouldn't want to put this in front of a board that's going to change. I've been there, done that. Don't want to do that.
Right. So yeah, that's what I guess. And it sounds like you're saying the same thing. So I think that we have some questions to address. And I also think that the board's going to be more receptive if those questions are addressed rather than if they're open-ended. So I think what they're expecting from Planning Commission, and this is on your work plan for this year, is to receive some sort of recommendation on this topic. So,
let me be clear. You took 2 extremes. You said recommendation and they don't want open-ended. I don't think I'm suggesting open-ended. I think that's wrong. But I also think recommendation might be wrong. That, there are going to be questions that have, some recommendation. That recommendation might have a couple of options that make sense. That owner occupancy. I know 2 board members that, and I won't say who they are, that don't think owner occupancy is necessary. I don't know what the other 5 or 6 think. I don't know what the rest of them think, right? There's going to be some of those that, we're gonna have to know, what they want as best we can. And I think there's going to be a few items like that. So I'm not suggesting we leave it open-ended. What do you want? I'm just, if we're at least somewhat prepared to have a discussion around, why we are recommending what we're recommending, and this is kind of our A and B option. I don't know.
I think that's fine. I think we can have a good discussion around all of these items. I think the board doesn't always agree with us, and I think that's perfectly fine. I think we can make a recommendation that we feel like as a board, this is my opinion. We can go through each of these items, come up with what we think is best, and then I think, within the memo that is presented, when the board considers this, the rationale can be described, or a planning commission, we can go and make a presentation when this ordinance is described. But I personally don't feel like we need to try and have all of these anticipated on what the board's going to do. I'm fine with coming up with our own recommendations and moving that forward. So I'd like to just start digging into each component. I'm not sure if others have another.
Lisa,
Well,
I guess I tend to agree with you that is the way I think, but if I'm the board, I'd like to see a proposal, or if I'm the public, I'd like to see a draft ordinance voted, and then get some input or feedback back from that. And so, as the most efficient use of time, it seems to me like diving into the actual choices we can make in an ordinance might be the best use of time.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked about this a lot. I think it's time to make some recommendations on the specifics.
Even without talking about why or goals or?
No, I mean, that's part of it. I'm not saying that. I think that the why and the goals is good. I think that's the whereas clauses in the ordinance that Dan is going to draft. And so I think those are good. And then I think, yeah, kind of digging into those. So, I mean, I think as far as, unless others disagree, maybe we jump into the kind of the why and why are we proposing this?
Well, speaking personally, I think the first thing to discuss would be, are we really sticking with original town, or are we doing it for the whole town? Because my view on lots of these issues would change depending on what the answer to that question is.
Maybe just for ease of kind of breaking this up, and so that we actually can get something done on this, is for the purposes of this first round, it applies to original town. And that would probably be an easier bite to chew here, rather than trying to think of every zone district and every context and every HOA. And so that'd be my preference, I think, just to tackle this kind of one area at a time.
Oh, and that's, I think, one of the criteria. I agree jumping in and doing this, but you just listed one of the first ones. Does it apply to the whole town or just Old Town? Old Town. Now, what step? Just go through these. We're not going to have them all perfect, but it feels like, do we need owner occupied or not? And discuss it, as Bob was saying, and then our recommendation, whatever it is. But I'd almost put down on the left side of a piece of paper, here's the 10 things we need to get answers. We want to provide input to the town about, and get those and give our reasoning for why we believe it should be owner occupied or not owner occupied.
Perfect, I agree.
And well, go ahead.
One of my first questions would be, how many potential ADUs are there if you only consider original town?
I don't know, 70 and 90, somewhere less than 100. There's already a bunch of them.
Given the number of lots and the size of the lots and the number of vacant lots and things like that, I'd be surprised if it's anything like that number.
Well, if you add open lot, there are, I think, 70, maybe there's more now, because there are additional homes going in to lots over across the creek in Old Town. And then, there are I did this, I could probably go find the numbers. I think I actually have a Google map with all the numbers on it, but I want to say there's 60 or 70 homes. There were a number of vacant lots, but it's probably coming up on a, somewhere between 75 and 100. Not that they would do it or that the lot would allow for it, but that's should be close to the number.
David, are you asking because you think it should be more than just original town that we should consider tonight?
Well, to be honest, I have at least some reaction that says if all we're going to consider, I'm a little doubtful about going through an extensive planning and zoning and ordinance drafting process just for original town. I'm not sure there's enough benefit there either in creating additional housing or in providing additional income or in meeting. I'm not sure original town by itself goes far enough to meeting any of these goals to make it a worthwhile exercise.
I agree
really
with
hard to
you.
hold my tongue, but
I agree with you. In the long run, we should expand this. I just feel like if we try and figure out the whole town right now, we can. That's a bigger discussion to think about different contexts. Would you want to tackle it all at once, or do you feel like we should break it off kind of by neighborhood?
I'm not sure that I know enough about the various areas and what the restrictions would be to be able to give an answer to that question, I'm afraid.
And I think
this came up.
Can we punt that one to Stephen? Because I'd be curious of if everything else in Superior is under a PUD. I mean, can we make code changes that can affect them anyway?
It would be, I mean, whether or not, like Lisa mentioned earlier, whether or not an HOA allows it is a different story. The HOA has changed over in Rock Creek, and that's obviously our biggest residential plan development within the area. So, whether or not they have a different opinion of it than they have in the past, but it's not something that they've allowed in the past. But they have, in recent conversations, they've been more flexible on certain things. But accessory dwelling units are quite different than like sheds and, that type of stuff that we've had conversations with them on. So, but I guess my response to all this is that, we'd be expanding the conversation. So with our Northwest area study, we looked at original town and applying this to original town. So for us to kind of, if we're looking to get different feedback from the board than we got the first time, expanding it to all of town would be one way to do that. I don't know if that's the goal or not. It sounds like the goal is to try to take, make some additional headway with the progress that we made so far. And then, if it works out and it seems to apply and we start hearing things from different neighborhoods, I know that Ben mentioned, it might be like nice to have that appropriate for Sagamore, and other, if other residents say the same thing, then I think we could look at it at that point. But I think that it might be the best, in our best interest to kind of keep this conversation limited to original town because that's where it started.
I agree.
I just want to make a comment. I'm not in favor of just original town. I mean, it takes away everything of the uniqueness of original town. We have nothing left. So, and the parking, I'm very concerned about the parking. If you go up William Street after work and stuff like that, where are people going to park? Are they going to be, my thing would be make them park on the lot rather than any street parking. So those would be the kind of questions that I would want to have answered, is where are they going to park and what does that do to the look of original town? Because right now it's changing all the time. Thanks.
Yeah, that's our view too. I mean, we're getting so frustrated with what's going on around here that, we don't even know what the comprehensive, I tried like heck to try to get some comprehensive approach to Northwest Superior, and the support just didn't happen. So, picking one item like these ADUs that seem to have some some interest is going to be a challenge. You know, we didn't look at how Rogers Farm should develop. We didn't look at how the lots internal to town should be developed. The character of original town is it's just going to keep doing what it's doing. I mean, it's everything from old homes and you know, expansions like we did to 1,400 square feet, all the way to, you know, the 2-story with a full basement behind us with you know, anywhere from 5 to 10 people living in it, right? And I mean, I'm just struggling with what the
Are you not supportive of ADUs? I'm confused.
Oh no, I'm highly supportive of it, because at this point, it seems that all that seems to be important to the town is more people. And honestly, I mean, you talked about, you know, value and income, right? For those of us who live here, it's like we're watching development make millions of dollars on lots just intruding in on original town, which will continue to happen. I guess one option is we tear down our house and we build another, you know, 40% lot covered 2-story, you know, units like they did down the street here. Or, you know, this approach to me feels like what's likely to happen is people are going to put apartments on top of garages. Maybe they'll put a carriage house in the back, and then, you know, and yes, it's going to get busy, but we can't get anybody to stop building. I mean, we've been complaining about it getting too busy for the last 5 years. And what do? We put 120 homes on a block over by, you know, on Rogers Farm. And, you know, so, you know, I guess that argument for me is that's kind of over. We're so overwhelmed by people from what we used to have. It's not as bad as, I mean, this isn't big city, don't get me wrong. I'm you know, but that life's gone, you know, it's just gone. And so I'm like, let's let people do what they want to do to get the value out of their property, right? And give them options to do that in a way that's a little bit easier for the people that live here and the income level that's here. And I think ADUs is a way to do that. That's probably the primary reason. You know, anyway, that's where kind of I'm at.
So I liked, as far as if we're still talking about kind of the why, so maybe we can get that buttoned up. I mean, I really liked the reason, Stephen. I don't remember if that was on a slide you had. We want to go back to that and list the reasons why we want to support this idea. I mean, this isn't independent of the how. I think the how means the whys are good. So I don't want to get ahead of and assume that the hows are all, you know, determined, but I think we should get the whys. I mean, I think, Bob, to your point, let's get the how or the whys on record. Was that on the slide, Stephen, or was that just kind of in your intro?
So the key benefits were there on this slide, but let's see.
Maybe we can look at that and see if there's anything that we want to exclude or that we want to add.
Okay. I think this is the slide that addresses it most.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
One of the reasons we brought it up, one of the whys, because I am one of the ones who brought this up, and Daryl too, were that there are just a lot of accessory dwelling units that are being done, you know, outside of code. And there are many of us who would like to have that benefit, but would like to do it legally, because we won't do it. I'm not going to build an ADU and put somebody in an apartment above my garage and violate code. I just won't do it. And so those of us who follow the rules, you know, don't get to do this, but, you know, people who just don't pay attention, just go do it. So that was one reason.
To kind of offer a path forward that's to allow a legal path forward.
Yeah, just come up with some legality, and there are probably some that aren't going to pass, and we can't overlook safety, right? That's probably number one. whether it's over by 200 square foot than the restrictive number we put in, who cares? But, but when it comes down to safety and, things like that, we have to figure out how to do that. Right? I mean, you've got these homes over here, the 6 that were built. 3 of them were built with separate entrances off the side from the garage that go upstairs to a unit that is $20,000 away from being another home. It's a bar. It's shaped in. You can see where everything goes when you walk around up there. But if we're going to say that the accessory dwelling unit is 20% or 40% or whatever of the main unit, those will fail because those are basically duplexes, right? They won't. I don't know what they'll do up there. Maybe cut them in half or something, but which is possible. And then there's another one over. There's all kinds of weird things that are going on.
Well, so I think that's kind of a separate thing that Dan's going to follow up on, right? Or what do we do with all the existing illegal units? How do we bring those into conformance, and what do they have to comply with? So maybe we need some additional help on
we probably will.
That issue, the backward issue, but the forward issue.
But yeah, for us, I think that, that's what I've heard from a number of folks. They'd like the income would be good. We had one lady move out because she couldn't convert a garage into a place to live. That was one of the stories that came out. So she moved away. But
so I think those 3 there, affordable housing, allow residents to age in place, residents with an option for additional income. I'm supportive of all of those 3 reasons.
Yeah, that's probably,
Are you saying affordable housing, meaning in the sense that it's simply lower cost housing, but it's market rate, or are you meaning affordable housing in the sense?
Good question.
Huh?
I think it's not affordable. I mean, my personal thought is, we can get into that, I guess, but affordable more loosely applied, not through
more
deep
attainable is a better word, I think.
Attainable, yeah, that's probably a better term.
I mean, I'd love to see some affordable programs come in, but not and even in here it's fine, but not in this process. I think it's.
I agree.
So,
Are we missing any reasons why, or will that get fleshed out too as we're continuing to talk, you think?
I think those are fine. Those 3 reasons are fine. Yeah.
So attainable housing, age in place, and additional income for existing residents, was that the 3rd?
Yeah, as well as I think Chairman McCool's allow, I don't know how do we phrase it, bring some of the
conformity,
legal,
right?
kind of
Encourage.
a legal path forward for some of these existing ADUs.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the book that you referenced, Bob, had a couple of other reasons in it that were quite good.
Do you have them?
Are they on the slide? Or?
No, I'm trying to find them. One had to do with providing a place for elderly, sort of providing accommodation for elderly family members.
That's a good point. I mean, it could be elderly family members, it could be kids in college, right? So it could be not just age in place, but provide family support.
Yeah, that was one of them.
Yeah, and that's probably a big one. That's important.
It's on the golden. It's on the golden slide. It says offers an option that supports.
Oh, they're good. Yeah, they had some good reasons. Yeah.
Needs such as care for a senior family member who
There
also
you go.
desires independence. So
yeah,
that one.
But they have the extra income for homeowners and a more affordable housing option.
Yep.
Yep. So I think that's a good ad.
Great.
So do we want to maybe look at Golden's, I mean, Golden's code, you can pull that up online, right, Stephen? I was looking at it today. You know, they have their ordinance written, and that might be at least a template to follow for our discussions. I don't know what people think of that.
That'd be great.
Be a nice checklist.
Do you want to go there, or do you want to answer more questions first, or? That seems like we're getting into detail now, but if that's what you feel like.
Go back up to your first slide and what you were.
Okay.
Just make sure we've.
I think, Stephen, you'll answer the questions by going through. They've put kind of the answers to the questions in the code, basically.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we can go through topically maybe and ask questions by
Yeah,
topic.
it's laid out very nicely, actually.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, the only, I mean, the one area that I thought was, the one area that was missing from the Golden Code was this Airbnb thing. Can you do short-term rentals, or do they have to be long-term rentals?
Yeah, we can add that to the list. I think that's worthy of discussion. Because then it becomes whether we put in a restriction, we put in an allowance, or we leave it alone. Not put it in.
Right.
Yeah, right. Those are the sort of the three options.
So what section are you guys in for the Golden Code?
I'm looking at their actual code, right?
It's 18.28.24.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I can put the link in chat if you want.
Okay, maybe I just scroll down.
I just clicked on it out of their presentation.
Yeah, I printed it out, so.
Yeah. Oh, I don't have a way to do chat, so I guess we can't.
Can you guys still see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's still your PowerPoint.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Huh.
I think you have to share again if you go to a different window.
Yeah, unless you
Okay.
share the screen. Yeah.
Okay, let me get to the section first and then I'll share.
I guess the first thing you could say about it is I'm not sure, I don't know exactly how Golden's residential zone districts work, but it seems to cover quite a wide, I mean, there's there's about half a dozen different zone districts, including PUDs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sort of in agreement with Lisa and Stephen. We can't address those, but I think it will take a lot longer. We have more groups of people to talk to. We have other organizations that have to be engaged. But once it's done, we sort of have the template for going forward. So yeah, and I don't. So I don't know if we just go through this one, seeing if it doesn't make sense, we move on. But
Yeah.
you know, I think development standards, that's a given, right, Stephen? I mean, it's got to be built to our code.
Yeah.
So when it says development standards, does this mean like the yard and bulk standards, like architectural standards? Like how does Golden use that term? Do you know?
It seems pretty broad, but I don't know how they use their term. And if I was to interpret their code, I would be saying that, because it applies to RE and PUD, it would, if it was downtown Superior and it was allowed, it would need to meet the same architectural criteria that we reviewed when we adopted the final development plan for that area. Whereas if it's in original town, we don't have design guidelines. It's mostly limited to, setbacks and height requirements and stuff like that.
Right. Okay. That's kind of what I was thinking. So in this case, it would just be whatever we decide are I guess.
Correct. It would be whether or not you felt like
setbacks or principal setbacks or separate height.
Yep. And in this case, I mean, like there are instances of homes and, that might be located more on the back of the property. And, if we had a restriction that said, it was a different front yard setback for an accessory dwelling unit, than it was for the primary dwelling unit, they wouldn't be allowed to have it. So,
So maybe we come back to this one once we get a better handle from the group, if we are okay with different forms, if this is an issue or not.
Yeah, we can get through it and come back. This neighborhood's so eclectic. I'm not sure it matters too much, but there might be some things we want to say about it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, do we even want to allow, a detached structure? If not, then this is irrelevant. But
Yeah. Well, yeah,
Okay.
we can come back to it. We can get back to any of these. And I can try to put some notes here.
yeah, maybe we just go through them, and if we have quick answers, we can kind of check them off the list, and then
Yeah.
we can circle back to the ones that need more discussion.
sounds good.
So existing or new development, I would just take that to, it says that it's, existing or new to me is just, could you get an accessory dwelling unit when you were to build your home, like if there was a vacant lot in town? So you can obviously build your single family home. Are you eligible to also add an accessory dwelling unit at that time? And I don't know how we would prohibit that. But it also talks about this being allowed on a single family home as well as a 2-dwelling household. So you could add, effectively, if there was a duplex, or if this was in I don't think that the units at 4th and William have enough lot, area on their lot left to put an accessory dwelling unit, but theoretically, if there were basements in those, they could convert, that, or they could convert some space above the garage or something like that and get up to 3 units. So that's something for you guys to consider, whether or not this is only for homes that have single family, use. But then again, the other context to that is that if you're going to require a parking space and they can't put a unit and a parking space, then, they're not going to be eligible for this as well. So there are some things that have other regulations that help control it. So that's the second one. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that or initial.
I'd be curious to see what you got. My initial thought was single family only, but I guess I would be interested to hear what other people think on this one. I'm open.
Well, the survey, it said on both, right, Stevens?
Yeah, I think so.
Last,
Well, I guess are you talking zone district or actual use of the property? Because
Right.
I guess I'm thinking
Correct.
it'd
We
be
did
okay
ask
in
it in
both
terms of
RL
zone.
and RM, but if the property's already a duplex, not to allow it?
Oh, you mean if it's single family, but it's a duplex from grandfather?
But it's RM zoning, yeah.
Yeah, I think both zone districts, but what about the actual use, right? If it's already a duplex, then do you want to allow it?
I don't know that we have that, do we? Do we have that in town?
Well, we have
the ones at
duplexes.
4th and William now, yeah, that are duplexes.
That's multifamily townhomes that's on that is on RM, right? That's
correct, yeah.
Yeah, that's.
So, I mean,
so could they add an ADU?
Right, the other question
could
is.
They? Yeah, if they had room, could they? They don't have room, but if they did. I mean, yeah, and that's a good point. What if that lot was, a third again the size that it is now, and they had a big courtyard in the back? Would it be permissible if it fit within the code, our code, to build an ADU? So.
I think they could add an ADU if you allowed them to carve up the inside of the building.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. Or take part of the above the garage and create a separate entrance in the garage or something. Sure. Yeah.
I guess maybe it's fine as long as they can meet the parking and the entrance location. Like if we go down the road on the others, maybe it's fine.
I'm leaning on the liberal side of things. So that's
Okay.
But,
I'm cool with more flexibility.
For us though, like RM zoning allows you to have, I mean, is it just going to be duplexes so that you can get up to no more than 3 units on one lot, or could you have a triplex and this happen? Is there
any dwelling unit have it, no matter how many also are on that lot?
Well, RM's allowed to have a triplex if it can fit within code, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But then the trick is, like, if you have a triplex and one unit gets an accessory dwelling unit, how do you allow that unit to have it and not the other 2? And then all of a sudden that's 6 units versus 3. I don't know that that's a problem that's actually going to materialize, but that's.
Or we just allow
only to consider.
It's got to be attached to your property. You know, I mean, but I guess that does get weird. I mean, I don't know what the property ownership is on these townhomes, but you know, if you have a garage and you want to put an ADU on top of it.
Yeah, if it's a standalone lot, that feels different than if it's like first come, first serve, then how do you,
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't thought about that circumstance. I'm curious, Steve or Ben or David, what do you guys think?
Well, I think I'd like to limit the number. I mean, if it was originally, I think I'd be happy just saying no more than 3 dwelling units on a lot. If it's a triplex that was built there originally, that's fine. If it's a duplex, there's one person could build an ADU, and really it has to do with the parking, because I'm doubtful that there'd really be enough parking spaces for all the cars if you had 6. If, for instance, you had 6 dwelling units on a lot that was approved for a triplex, I think the number of cars would probably expand beyond what the lot was really capable of holding.
Did you have a thought, Steve?
Go ahead.
Steve? I saw you come on.
I was just saying to me, point 7 addresses, I like the idea of only 1 ADU per lot, whether it's single, double, or triple. I think if you limit it to that, and I think it's going to help, the parking is going to stop some of it itself. So I guess I don't have a problem whether it's single, double, or triple, as long as there's only 1 dwelling unit. I think you do get into the problem of who gets it, right? But you know, who's who gets that dwelling unit? Which one of those 3, if there are? So
yeah.
Well, and that's also assuming separate ownership, which they would have to like have a condo plat or something. So it's probably one owner for the whole triplex, and if they wanted an ADU, they could get it too. So maybe we look at this in terms of like whether or not we need to change anything, and it sounds like maybe if we get through the whole thing, we'll realize that some of the stuff's addressed because Steve's reading ahead. So
well,
far
it looks
down.
like this is just single family and duplexes, right? So like Golden doesn't allow it.
Correct.
On more than a duplex. Maybe that feels like an okay balance.
Why don't we start there?
Yeah, I like that.
We learn more. If we learn more, we learn more.
Yep, agreed.
We have some time, so.
And we don't have triplexes that I'm aware of, so we are addressing an issue that may not be. That's just if it gets built, I guess. So
okay.
Parking, 1 parking space per unit. Is that reasonable?
I like that.
Yep, off-street parking space
on the property isn't.
I really, this issue, I'm with Phyllis on this one. You can walk down William Street and there are already both running and non-running cars parked along the street. I mean, allowing that's just with the existing units that are there.
That's an interesting question. What's our code requirement? So you could make anybody who comes in for an ADU also meet the single family parking requirement. So they have to add, I mean, what does a single family house need to have off street? 2?
2 typically, I mean, it's bedroom based, but two typically. So, but the thing about Original Town is that I think most of the residential units in Original Town were built before the requirement was in place. So,
yeah,
their compliance is would be on a case by case basis. I don't know that everybody would do it, but you could in order to, because otherwise you're not necessarily addressing like if you require 1 space and it's because they have an ADU unit and they already have a home with no off-street parking, then they're only providing 1 unit. So that's a good question. Does it only apply to the unit that they're asking for, or does it apply to their whole property? Does it need to be
right? Do they need to bring the whole property into conformance in order to get the ADU? I would lean on Original Town residents, I guess, on that one, Bob and Phyllis, if you feel like.
Your problem right now has nothing to do with ADUs. I mean, the parking.
No, I know, but if somebody wants to add an ADU to bring them into
6
conformance.
individual guys living in a house, and they all have a car in one house, right? And until we address that, which is separate from this, you know, I mean, and how do you, right? I mean, you go to any city, suburb, public streets, you're gonna get some big arguments about, wait a minute, this is a street I live in, why can't I park on it, right?
Well, that's the thing too, is it's not, at the end of the day, you guys need to, I mean, the context is, you know, if we require the property to be conforming when to be eligible for an ADU, then they have to, are currently conforming, then they'd have to have 2, you know, driveway spaces or 2 spaces in a garage that are off the street. And then they'd have to show that they can provide an additional driveway space to allow for the ADU unit. So effectively, that space is there should they use it, whether or not, you know, we can't force them to park in their driveway or park in their garage. They're
No,
just,
and go ahead. Like you said, Stephen, I don't think, I mean, we happen to get our cars off, you know, we have a sort of a dirt driveway. There are a lot of people who just don't have a driveway.
right.
Or so I think tacking on that if you do an ADU, not only do you have to provide the 1 parking space, you also have to come into compliance with your 2. That would discourage people from doing this. So
Okay.
I probably wouldn't be for that, but I do like the idea that if you're going to build an ADU, build a parking space. I don't know, most of us, I don't know, it's hard to say. There's a mix. There's parts of town that there is no driveway and there is no, but then there's the alley and people park, you know, they pull their cars kind of up into their back lot in the alley. They're not official parking spaces. They're not driveways. They're not garages. There's, you know, yeah, and that would be a tough one.
I'm fine not requiring it if you guys don't, I mean, I think that's more of a you know, kind of your neighborhood context.
I think the only issue I have is, what if someone builds an ADU on their driveway where they've got their 2-car parking spots, right?
Right, yeah, I think that you'd want to make sure that they don't become any less compliant than they are already. So like a garage conversion to an accessory dwelling unit would be tricky if all of a sudden you go from 2 parking spaces to 1.
Yeah.
You know, then you're creating a parking problem or adding to the existing parking problem.
And then what's a driveway? Do I have a driveway? I don't know if you've looked where we park our cars.
Yeah, I don't, it seems like it's a Pandora's box.
All right.
You know, it just keeps on getting, so.
Whole conversation, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But I do like the 1 parking space, and if there
Me
needs
too.
to be some language.
Yeah, agreed.
I think that's good first to start.
Steve, is the current town requirement 1 parking space per bedroom?
I have to look for the original code, because I have had so many go through my head that I'm not positive at this point as to whether or not it may be like, and there's like half spaces that are in certain, you know, for downtown. I know that it's like a half space, so I'm not sure if that applies. It may just be 1 for 1 up to a certain point, and I think that the cap is 3. Like you don't have to provide any more than 3 spaces, regardless of whether or not you have 3 bedrooms or 5 bedrooms. So it's not a perfect science, and you know, the more bedrooms you have, the less parking spaces are required. So it doesn't get up to, like, you're not required to have a 5-car garage in order to have 5 bedrooms in a house, and those certainly exist in places in town. So, but so my recollection is it's 1 for 1. I would guess that it's 1 for 1 bedroom, 2 for 2 bedrooms, 3 for anything above 3. But it may be a higher trigger. It may be 2 parking spaces for a 3-bedroom, and then the 4th bedroom and up requires the 3rd space. I couldn't say for certain.
And I'd want to go back and look at all the PDs that we approved for parking spaces for units, because
not again.
Every time
like
I looked at it, there was like never enough. You know, I'm like, oh my god, there's just can't possibly. This isn't gonna work. But
yeah, and downtown has fewer parking requirements than other places. Yeah, so. So unit size and configuration, again, it looks like here that they modified single family, 2-family home, 1,000 square feet or more. So 50%. So they can only have so they did this based on the size of the home, which seems like a good way to make sure that it's still accessory and not, you know, an equivalent size structure. So it's just whether or not you feel like those regulations are appropriate for our original town.
I didn't have a big problem with this. It seems, I mean, you know, our house is 1,400 square feet, so that would mean, you know, 700 would be the maximum size for an accessory dwelling unit. I suppose, and I don't know how you write it, Dan, but you know, like if we were, one of our thoughts, if this goes through, if we build a 2-car garage and put an ADU on top, was sort of the thought behind it, and we'd probably add some square footage to our home when we did that. So that would therefore increase our primary dwelling square footage, right? And then maybe give us an extra 100 square feet in the ADU, right? So we might be able to get up to 800. So I guess you'd have to figure out how to do that in the code, but this seems very reasonable to me.
I agree.
The only question I have, and I don't have a real good sense for this, but it says it can't be less than 200 square feet. That seems so small to me. Could you even, is that the right minimum?
I think the building code actually wouldn't let you, I looked into this one time, like I think it's like actually like 230 or something if you look at like minimum size for a bathroom and minimum size for a bedroom.
Yeah.
So I think at some point the building code comes in for these spaces and would, from a life safety perspective, regulate the minimum size.
I think safety is the important factor here. And I mean, you got people living in RVs that are smaller than 200. I've seen an amazing 250 square foot place, but
that's fine.
You know, it kind of depends. But I agree, safety is most important. But if people want to live in a tiny home, you know,
I'm comfortable letting the building code regulate minimum size.
Okay, great idea. I don't disagree.
You know what that, so you just want to change that to whatever our minimum size is, Stephen, or is it really?
Yeah, I'll check. The last conversation I recall having with this, and it was about the recent building code updates we had, was that they reduced the standards for what was considering. I think that like if you were to go build, but I think it was like they had some more, and it was, we had the 2012 building code. So they may have had like a 600 square foot kind of minimum requirement previously. And now with all the tiny homes and stuff coming out that shows you can build something smaller, it was either reduced or eliminated. And I think the gist of what I took from it, or what I remember, was that it's just the components. You know, there's not like, if you can provide a bedroom, you know, no one's going to say that you have to sleep on a double bed or a queen bed or even a regular size full bed, you know, like, you know, single bed or whatever. That dictates but you need a closet for it to be a bedroom. You need egress, you need a bathroom, you know, that has, you know, certain, you know, bathing facility. You know, it can't just be a half bath or whatever in order for it to qualify. So, and then you need a kitchen area. But if you put all that in one room, you know, that's a studio, not a, you know, you eliminate walls in that sense. So it can get pretty small. So
maybe we have a minimum too, and then the building code would overrule it or would make that bigger. I mean, but then if codes change, I don't know. I don't know the right number on that.
I don't think that there is a real key to a minimum, like in my mind. Like, it's the smaller it is, the less impactful it's going to be. It's not going to have 6 people in it, you know, or so I don't see an impact to it being too small. But
why would we have this number?
Right. So
I'm good with that too.
Yeah.
Because it will need to meet building code for safety, right? So
I guess, the only impact I could see is that it becomes more, you know, attainable for more people. And if there was a concern with that, then, you know, that's not something anyone's addressed yet. If everyone adds a 200 square foot home and one new resident comes in each of those homes, then I don't see that being terribly impactful for original town. But it also makes it more attainable for more people to do it without a, you know, a size restriction.
Yeah, there's some Greenpoint requirement minimums. That's it. I'm not seeing anything.
Okay.
Okay. So we're generally okay with this, unless we find some minimum. Okay.
So sorry, are we deferring to the building code, or are you okay with the language that's in the golden?
I mean, I'm okay with this, what's in golden, but if we're going to be faced with dealing with a minimum that we have, I think we need to know if there is a minimum, and if so, we'll have to at least read.
Okay, we'll just see if there's a conflict with the building code based on how that one's written. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
So unit size exception, this is again for that conversation of whether or not you want it to be eligible for somebody converting a basement to an accessory dwelling unit. So then they get a unit size exception to allow for an existing single household or 2 household unit shall be no larger than the existing single household or 2 household unit. That's actually like more like a duplex, or
That's just basically saying they can use the full basement.
I think that may be the intent here, but I'm reading it differently as I read through the whole thing. It seems like a new accessory dwelling unit, well, yeah, enclosed entirely within one. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. So, so that, I mean, and that's one of those things that would be hard to control, I think,
Maybe hard to require, I think, too. So.
But that's, I mean, so the one side of that argument is there's hardly any visual impact at all. So why not let somebody convert a basement into a duplex essentially? So that's where it becomes like, are we really just changing our code so that everything becomes medium density residential versus low density residential? So I don't know, like, I think that's one of those things where we need to look at whether or not there's additional tools in place to ensure. I mean, I think that, again, that's not quite as egregious as what's medium density residential, in the sense that could all be a rental if you have an owner occupy requirement that applies to the ADU. So there are things that differentiate them. We just need to look at the code to make sure that there's enough to merit, having 2 different zone districts still.
In effect, is all this doing is just saying, like, it's just determining which of the 2 units is the ADU and which is the primary by saying this. I mean, and could you look at it that way, and that, like, somebody would want to say, no, mine is still the principal even though it's smaller? Like, if there is a regulation on who has to live in which one?
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing I think that needs more research, because my concern is this is effectively how do we ensure that this isn't effectively an upzone? Because I don't know that the residents would feel the same way if, so.
Yeah, you're basically creating a duplex, right? When you build.
I'm fine with this language. I think, given what you said, Stephen, I think you're right. Like, we don't want to effectively upzone this. And I do think the accessory dwelling unit needs to be accessory and smaller to help minimize the impact.
Yeah, the problem with a basement, though, is even being able to make it accessible and less than or fit within the 800 square feet. If you have a 1,400, 1,500 square foot basement, that would get challenging to create an ADU down there and then not have a portion of the basement for that ADU. And I guess you do it, but it would just be.
Well, this is just basically saying it can be equivalent, it just can't be larger, which I think means then your whole basement could be
an ADU
language.
Right. Yeah,
right?
It does create a duplex, right? But not a nice one, but it does. So.
Right, there are things we can look into that there too. Like, if you need does it qualify to have a basement ADU without a separate entrance? Or do you need to actually have like a walkout type of situation, or excavate in order to create a separate entrance? In which case, if there's a separate entrance and then there's a stairs somewhere to the main level, maybe that portion of the downstairs isn't part of the accessory dwelling unit. Maybe there's still a laundry room or access to the furnace or something that effectively is still part of the. So I think architecturally or whatever, it could still be done to make sure that those 2 things aren't in balance. That one thing, the primary unit stays greater than the accessory unit. And maybe this isn't the exact language that would fit for original town for that case, because maybe we don't want it to be of equal size. And maybe we need something more to ensure that, more than just the home ownership, living in, or home occupancy requirement to be, or owner occupied requirement, sorry, to be the differential. But maybe that owner occupancy thing is, I think that's something that Dan, will need to look into kind of more legally. And then we can just look into it more, research wise, in terms of what are other jurisdictions do to help differentiate one from the other, and an ADU from a duplex, essentially. So,
I mean, We're talking as if ADUs and duplexes are really completely different, but someone sort of looking at this with a relatively fresh eye, I mean, there seems to be more of a distinction than a difference, actually.
And that's true. Maybe the difference is regulate, like the difference comes in the fact that it might be around the other parameters, not around the actual size, right? So you could have a 50-50 split, but in order to get the ADU, you have to provide the one parking space rather than two, but you're also restricting it to owner occupied, and
Yeah.
you know, it's, you don't pay, maybe you pay a reduced tap fee versus the full tap fee. So I have less issue with the 50-50, I think, as long as it's not more than, because of the other parameters around it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't turn this into a true duplex. I mean, you're right. There's no tap fees. There's no way to split ownership. You can't, I mean,
Yeah,
it
right.
is, it is different. I mean, it's owner occupied or not, it's still different. It's not really a duplex.
Yeah, because a duplex would have to have the full number of parking spaces. It would have to pay a full tap fee.
Right.
Okay.
Right, but then you're not going to get a duplex. The other side of that is, why do a duplex when you can do this a lot cheaper?
Right.
So that's another,
Sure.
like, you know, financial impact for the town that just to be, be mindful of it. So,
Right. On the flip side, you're right.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is also not like, this is a lot less likely in town. I mean, you know, I can't put a basement. I mean, I guess I could. I'd be running some constantly, but you know, our water table's at 11 feet or 10 feet or something. So
it's expensive. I mean, and that's the other thing is building code wise, this one's another issue because I think a duplex might, and I don't know, maybe an ADU will trigger anything. Any separate living quarters would trigger a demising wall, like for an upstairs downstairs situation.
Fire
It
rating
wouldn't,
and stuff.
but yeah, but for like it's fitting, like if you had a home that you wanted to split in half and do, you know, a new door on the first level that is your your accessory dwelling unit, and then I think you need a demising wall that's fire rated and stuff. But for a upstairs downstairs split, I don't think that there is any like real update or upgrade, which would mean that, you know, effectively people could get, you know, most of the benefits of a duplex and not provide the same.
And they can do it today without a separate entrance, right? I mean, you want to rent out a room, you can rent out your basement today, you know, and have
Correct.
have a family living down there. They just walk through your house and maybe even have a separate entrance, right? I mean, it's, you know, you're not preventing me from renting a room, you know, and a multiple people. And
it's the kitchen, that changes the whole thing. Yeah,
you're right. It is. Yeah.
And those are probably, one of the more critical things that actually should be built to code for fire purposes and whatnot. So,
absolutely.
So yeah, there's all sides of the argument. And that's your guys' direction as to where you want it to be.
This then, just leave it as it reads.
I'm fine with as it reads.
All right. 3 people on an accessory dwelling unit. I'm okay with that. I'm okay listening to other considerations too.
I'd like it to be 3 related people.
We can't control that legally, I don't believe. Yeah.
That's too restrictive, I think. I would rather regulate it around, my preference is to regulate it around more. This is hard to enforce. I'd want some guidance, I think, from the city attorney on this one. 2
college kids want to move into an ADU, you know, I wouldn't want to restrict it. I mean, that seems like a reasonable thing to do, you know. I mean, hell, there's 6 of them back behind us, so.
I think if we put a number in, I'd be comfortable with 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think once we kind of get into whether they're related or not, or family, you know, there's some Americans with disabilities issues that might kind of come into play. But I think it's fine to point out how many people, you know, would be allowed within an accessory dwelling unit, just generally.
Yeah. Any more than 3, less than 3? Anybody have any opinions, or is that good?
I mean, you could tie it to the size, I guess, but that feels complicated.
They're not that different in size. I mean,
yeah.
So,
and I like the 3 because then even if you under 5 in the unit size exception, even if you have a bigger bigger place, if you decide to split it 50-50, you're still getting only 3 people in there. You're not getting 6 people in there.
Yeah.
So I'm for 3.
All right. Let's leave it
Okay.
there for now. All right. So just 1 ADU per household?
Yes.
Yes.
So,
Let's see. Which where are we at? Oh yeah.
Or I
Yeah.
Let's see. This is a tough. This one I have some thoughts on, but let's see. I'm guessing because I'm not in favor of this, and I know some other people aren't. But.
Sorry, can you go back up? We're talking about
Oh, are we still on 7?
that are we on number 7?
Are we all?
I think we answered that one already, but
Okay.
that's the number
Oh,
per
yeah.
lot, so you can't have more than one.
No, we're good. Okay, so then owner occupancy.
Oops,
I'm
sorry.
in favor of owner occupying one or the other.
So
I
I'm
am
gonna-
also.
Let me read you guys something. I'll try to skip through it. This is, I'd ask you guys to look at this Backdoor Revolution. This is the guy that presented. I know the mayor went to this seminar. He's the one who sent me this.
Yeah.
And it talks about, that is common. That what we're suggesting here, owner occupancy, is what just about everybody had been doing in through the 2000s and everything else. This guy says there does not appear to be any clear logic for why owner occupancy should be required on a property with an ADU when it's not required for any other type of housing unit, such as a single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex, or large multifamily house. ADUs appear to be singled out by regulations in a manner that infers targeted arbitrary treatment compared to any other type of housing unit. So owner occupancy bylaws for ADUs were likely born partially from a fear of the change in the perception that the owner occupancy implied stability in neighborhoods, whereas rental housing implied transitional housing. Owner occupancy bylaws, unfortunately, strike directly at the heart of one of the greatest benefits of property ownership, the flexibility of choosing how to use your property. So an owner can no longer opt to move away from the property without selling it. He's stuck, right? The rent, if he wants to go somewhere else, he's stuck. The owner cannot consider the option of the property serving future use as an investment property. Eliminating these options from possible uses of the property diminishes the flexibility of a property with an ADU. So, I mean, there's more to read on this if you can get your hands on this book. The more I read this, I was like, well, yeah, you're right. If I have a rental unit and I decide I want to move, I have to sell. I can't rent my house out now because I've rented out the ADU.
I would defer to those of you who live in this neighborhood. If you don't feel that this is important as far as property, I mean, for all those reasons, I won't get in the way of taking that
Yeah,
away.
I mean, I'd like to hear what people think. I mean, there's a lot of rental. I don't know that we're 50-50, but we're probably coming up on it. I mean, there's still a lot of owner occupied here, but people next to me rent, and 3 people across the street, or 2 of the 3 across the street rent. And, I know it's a mix. I don't know where it's at though.
This seems to me to be one of the distinctions between an additional dwelling unit and a duplex.
Not really, because you've got a property. I mean, a duplex is, hell, in duplexes, you can arrange those to split and sell the half of the duplex.
Right.
You can't do that with an ADU. I mean, the big problem here is, and that I really agree with here, is that you're stuck, right? If I have to move, I've lost my ability to have that ADU that I built, right? So if I'm put in a situation where I get transferred, or I got to go back to Vermont and take care of Daryl's parents, and now I have my house here with somebody renting an ADU, my choices are, sell the place or kick the ADU out and rent the big house, right? And then I'm still stuck with the financial burden of the ADU that was built. So again, it's one of those discouraging things, right? You start thinking about, oh crap, if I have to live here, I could end up getting screwed. So that's why it can put people in a bad position, and it does, and I agree with the guy. It's your property, and why do you target ADUs? Why is that the target, right?
What do you think, Phyllis,
I don't know.
in this neighborhood?
I'm sorry, Lisa, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I just was curious what you think on the owner occupancy for this neighborhood, in your opinion.
I think it should be owner occupied. Yeah. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I was just curious, just with your experience, and I agree with everything you're saying, Bob. It's probably done for protectionist reasons, just to kind of get an ordinance on the books and help alleviate some concern. So it could be something that maybe we,
Yeah, I think
include some discussion on the pros and cons on.
I think people need to understand what it means, because it could just it'll discourage ADUs rather than encourage them, right? So people need to know, if you got to move, too bad, so sad, you either sell or kick the renter out, right? So you also have to watch your leases, because you're not allowed to let the person stay there. It'll get tricky, and I think people need to understand it before they make the decision. And that this is going to be one of those tough areas that I think the board needs to be aware of the implications of owner occupancy and what it does. So if we're okay, I'm fine. If you guys want to put single occupancy, but I'd like a note on this one that says there are things that need to be considered. People need to understand what it means and what the impacts are.
I mean, there is the director may waive this requirement for temporary absences. So I don't know how you define temporary or.
But then you can't rent your home, it would be potentially an absence, right? So that indicates to me that, yeah, sure, you can go to Vermont and take care of your grandparents, and I'll give you a temporary absence for that. But it doesn't say I can rent my home out and cover the costs, of this home. So it just puts people in a tough position.
I'm thinking maybe like if you've invested in it for 2 years, maybe instead of, you can, for a period of up to 2 years, you could, have both be rent or occupied, or I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a hybrid model on here some way where there's a way to have owner occupancy be the default, but under certain provisions, you can waive that requirement. I don't know.
I just think this needs more discussion. I mean, I think the people who live in the neighborhood need to know it. I think the board needs to know it. And when I was talking about earlier about, I think there are places where we're going to need to have some options, and why this is one of the areas I
think you're right.
That just it needs to be thought about.
Maybe, Dan, this is something where we bring forth, like, so it doesn't look like I'd want to hear from the rest of them, but maybe there's this couple sections in the ordinance that has 2 options, the language. And that way, planning commission recognizes value to both of these, and here's the reasons why, and then the public can weigh in.
Oh, you're talking about within the ordinance putting 2 different versions?
Or in the staff memo or whatever, when this goes to kind of whatever, taking forth kind of 2 different options, right, so that folks have the ability, I think, to see the language and think about it rather than presuming one starting point.
Yeah. I mean, we could probably put the, put proposed language, and potentially in the memo, kind of maybe point out that, maybe that this was an issue that the planning commission was discussing and considered alternatives or something along those lines. Maybe that's the way to present it,
And this is why I don't want to put an ordinance in front of them, and and then they miss the staff member. This is what I was saying earlier is and I'm okay with the the idea of a conceptual ordinance, and I hope that the first round's not going to go to the board so they can vote on it. I hope to God that doesn't happen, but if this ordinance can just, if we can just think outside the box here and provide an ordinance that has this language in it that, hey, this section's highlighted because we really think you need to pay attention to it. It's important, and there's some pros and cons and pros, depending on which way you look at it. So look at these closely and pay attention, right? That's my nervousness about, doing just a traditional standard ordinance that we put in front of them. I mean, I'd feel better with an ordinance that had, both sets of language, or at least both options, and something explaining, the pros and cons to each of them, you know, on some of these. I think we're going to be in agreement on most of these. There might only be one or two of these.
I mean,
Yeah.
particularly what I could do is kind of put together a draft and then kind of come up with alternative language for, you know, the planning commission to look through and kind of discuss, and then we can kind of get together, you know, an ordinance that's you know, presented to the board.
Yeah.
Board of Trustees. But maybe this is kind of my first pass through based on your you know, your input, and then I can come up with kind of alternative options, say for, you know, owner occupancy, and then we can kind of regroup and you
Yeah,
can
that sounds great.
Yeah.
you know, get
And the
some.
planning commission is, you know, saying yes. And
Mhm.
I'm the one who I think no, because I just think there are some areas people need to understand if you say yes to this.
Yeah, I can look up some options on this.
Yeah, I mean, I can be swayed on this one pretty easily if this is not a concern. I'm just hearing
Right.
both.
Yeah. And I agree. If nobody's concerned about this, I'm cool. And I just don't think people will have thought this through. If you're against ADUs, of course, this would be a good way to limit them getting built, because it could put people, or you're gonna end up in situations like we are today, which it's unenforceable anyway. You're not gonna even know that I moved, you know, or you're not gonna go knock on the door and find out. And, you know, part of creating, you know, legislation and laws, I mean, create things that are feasible to follow and then monitor, right? So.
And Dan, I think maybe part of the rationale, sorry, David, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was going to say, I think, I mean, there's a slightly different way of looking at this, which is that there are probably people living in areas that are zoned single-family residential, which would like to keep them zoned single-family residential. So in essence, by offering ADUs or allowing ADUs, you are to some extent already loosening that or relaxing that requirement. You don't have to necessarily go the whole way of, I mean, if you let somebody move out and rent the two buildings to completely separate people, you've effectively converted it to multifamily residential, which is a sort of step further.
No, that's not true. It gets you one step closer to RCS, which we don't use, but multifamily has considerably more housing than.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I'm using multi in a generic.
Yeah, just be careful, because it's not. I mean, I really don't like extremes put out there. That gets me wound up.
Yeah.
So you know, it does. Yeah, but yes, it does allow owners to have two rental properties on a lot.
To David's point, though, I mean, I get Bob's point as well, but the owner occupancy has been a tool to kind of, you know, when you take that away from this stuff, especially that allowance to finish a basement and have equal size, that's where I don't know how that's any different than RM zoning. So without that owner occupancy level, I feel like we need to do more research into how that gets distinguished from, you know, having a duplex effectively without the ADU being distinct. So
and it'd be really good to understand why we care, right? I mean, why do we care? What do we think is going to happen? I mean, people are doing it today. You know, they are. I mean, the guy back here I know is renting to. it's anyway. I always like to ask why. You know, why yes or why no, or what are we worried about? What is it that the concern really is, and is that really a concern, or is it a fear?
Well, the concern on the face of it is whether or not we're going to an upzoning. And if we're just doing an upzoning, we should just do an upzoning and be more direct about it to RM zoning. If we're doing ADUs, then they need to be limited to ADUs.
Dear Lord, it's not RM though, Stephen. That's six units per. I could have 12 units here in RM.
But it's an allowance that isn't allowed in residential low density, so that makes it different.
Sure.
So,
well, except for the other ADU requirements. I mean, there are other things you don't restrict in a single family home, like number of people that live there. You know, there are limits, right? So you're not going to build. I mean, I'm assuming in theory these 6 homes over here are not going to can't be approved as ADUs, because I mean, even though they built them, they built them like duplexes. They're 4,000 square feet with two 2,000 square foot, you know, basically two 2,000 square foot units, right? With one has a bar instead of a kitchen today. But
Depends on the restriction. Like if you only limited the ADU to 50% of the size of the home, then
Right, they have to cut it in half, right?
right. So
Yeah.
Well-
So anyway, it's it is. Like I said, and I know there's a mix on the board too that feel good about this issue, so it'll get discussed. It's going to be one of those topics that we need to discuss. So.
The other thing, I mean, so I think that the memo that accompanies whatever, it's really difficult to put Dan in a position to write two different ordinances or two different, code pieces. I think that, planning commission is probably best off landing on one or the other, and then including a memo that discusses the pros and cons of each, or where you guys had difficulty and why you landed where you did, and what you considered and all that stuff. And that's probably not going to be a staff memo. My understanding is that this is PC's work plan, so PC will need to take the reins on this, and provide whatever context they want to provide, presentation wise or memo wise, that accompanies whatever comes through that ordinance.
Yeah, that's great, because then we can share that context for the discussion.
Yeah, and I'll just disagree. I mean, it's fine for me to disagree. You guys can decide to do that. I disagree. I think Dan could figure it out, but that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think respectfully, I think I would agree with Stephen. I think it would be kind of difficult to present an ordinance that had kind of two different provisions in it. And I think probably the cleanest way to do it.
That's why I don't want an ordinance presented.
So I think
that's how I started this. So you know where I stand. I don't.
Yeah. So I think maybe the cleanest way is to for me to kind of make a run through of it, present it to you all. We can kind of continue discussion on.
Almost like this could become an ordinance if we decide to make it one. I mean.
Right. Nothing goes to the board until you guys act on it. So
no, that's fair. Yeah, we'll look at it later.
Yeah, and I think I wouldn't want to move on it until we take public comment. Yeah. And I think we could get feedback from the public and lean that way.
Yeah. All right, so let's go on to number 9.
So number 9 is design elements, and we talked about this through the Northwest Area Plan, but I don't see the ones that they've put in place here as anything that couldn't get applied to Original Town, even though there aren't certain restrictions. It's just to mirror or complement what the existing structure looks like. So if you're going to put a secondary structure on, or you're going to put an addition that actually has similar materials, colors, window types, roof pitches, that type of stuff as the primary dwelling. Second thing is whether or not you want that accessory unit visible from the street.
Yeah.
So whether or not that needs to be secondary or can be as primary as the first. And some folks feel that visibility from the public right of way is important, and other jurisdictions don't. And then this one goes as far as to kind of limit window placement, so that, and this is again an impact on like your neighbor. So if you were to put this in the corner of your on one side or whatever, and all of a sudden it's right next to their bedroom, it's provisions for window placement. But that's a tricky one. I don't know, like I've never had to enforce something like that. You kind of know, you have to actually have like the floor plan of the adjacent residence to know, how it affects this residence. So, but there are things I think that one should be mindful of, and maybe to a greater degree when they're, requested. And again, like this, it's the same thing for, like the owner occupancy. From a planning perspective, ADUs are considered an exception. It's something that's exceptional, that's not allowed, necessarily. It's different than how the code's different, generally written. So there may be a little bit of a higher standard that has to come into play in order to mitigate those impacts. So, but whether or not that's appropriate, and whether or not, that, we feel like that's appropriate for Original Town is what you guys need to weigh in on. So.
Do you feel like, so I'm reading A, and to me this feels super subjective. How do you determine what is similar? I'm not a fan in codes to use terms that they're just hard to administer. And I don't know in Original Town part of the kind of eclecticness of Original Town is kind of that things don't match out there. I don't know that this is important. I think I'd want feedback from the residents on this provision. Like, I think we could draft it, but I don't like the term similar. I don't know how you regulate similar, unless Stephen, I think you feel like you could administer that term.
I mean, like for something that like, you know, is dialed in, like Downtown Superior's design guidelines, this wouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
But with no framework or whatever, you know, like, and then it becomes a little bit more onerous for an applicant, you know, like
Yeah.
I need to know what roof pitch your existing structure is, you know, and
I got 3 different kinds. Which one can I pick?
yeah, so
yeah, that's the way the whole town is. So I agree with Lisa. I think
I would prefer not to include this in original town unless residents want some sort of architectural control.
to any degree, like nobody cares if the secondary entrance is right next to the primary.
Well, sorry, I'm talking about just A. I agree
we're talking
on
design.
B.
Yeah, I'm good with talking about some of these others. Yeah,
Okay, so no architectural elements, but I mean, except, you know, maybe the entrance and window placement and stuff like that.
I agree with B. C, I don't agree with.
So supposing somebody says, okay, my accessory dwelling unit is going to be a single wide mobile trailer.
If it meets building code.
Yeah, it's actually mentioned down there in 12, but we were going to get to that. What can we save that discussion till we get down there? Because they specifically bring that up. So let's wait till we get to 12 on that one.
Okay.
Well, I was referencing it in terms of this. I mean, is it in relation to the similar design issue?
Well, we have a lot of trailers in original town.
We do.
I mean, I don't know that, I don't know. Maybe, I'm not sure. I think we should wait to get to that till we get to that section.
I mean, I quite like the idea of, I don't care what, I mean, if you don't want to say similar, you still have a judgment issue if you say something like compatible. Do we really want 2 completely different? I mean, if somebody has a small bungalow at the moment, do we want them to put a concrete block structure up or something like that? Is that okay?
Do you care? I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but I mean, it's on serious. In all honesty, in all seriousness, I mean, do you care if it meets code? I mean, I don't think anybody would do that. I don't think I want to live in something that looks like crap, but
no.
I mean, it's got to meet our building code. I mean, and then I guess if you can build a cinder block house, but maybe you build I mean, things that could happen. Just to your point, David, is shipping containers, right?
Yeah.
There are people doing shipping containers. Is that cool? Are we okay with it? I am, but but
no, I mean,
you can have cool stuff happen, or you could make everything look like, and you're going to all get mad at me about this, but you could put requirements in that it's got to look like Rock Creek, or it's got to look like this, or it's got to look like that, which this neighborhood is not, right? It's sort of the antithesis of all that, right? So those standards just don't exist here, which is why many of us like it. Not that we dislike the others, it's just not what we like. It's not our preference. So
no,
it's a tough one. I hear you. You could end up with some pretty, I mean, we have some pretty, but it's all opinion. I mean, I think there's some ugliness here, and I think there's some really amazing stuff here. It's interesting. Yeah.
No,
I think on the flip side, we have some homes that aren't very, that could be questionable in terms of maybe quality. And if you make them build to match that, then are we, like, I think you could also, it could come back the other way.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying I necessarily think this is the ideal way of describing it, but I'm not sure I think that throwing the whole thing out and not replacing it with anything else is...
it's really hard to do this specifically. It's a very subjective thing, so
yeah,
it's hard unless you have specifics, like Steven said.
Or you require it to match, so you either go one extreme where there's no black and white, or you...
But that's hard. You let me build 2 additions on my old home that don't match. I mean, the roof pitch doesn't match. The siding didn't match. That requirement isn't there today. I mean, I did a 630 square foot addition with a different roof pitch, with a different exterior material. The windows were different until I replaced the other ones. But
Bob, I didn't review that.
No, well, I don't know who did, but it obviously met our code. It was
On
all
this
code. But, you know,
I didn't realize that Bob was one of these illegal people.
yeah, you gotta have to look at our existing code, because if you do this, you're telling me that I can't put an addition on unless it matches this too, right? I mean, it's
Well,
almost
that would just be for the
unfair.
ADUs. So, I mean, I think this is
Well,
where
yeah.
Steven's saying it's different because this is an ADU.
But if I build a garage with an ADU on top, I mean, I want it to look nice, you know, I mean.
And most people will, you know, but I mean,
Yeah.
so I mean, I don't know. I guess I get Bob's point that if, you know, we don't require restrictions for an addition that's not an ADU, why require this? Because it doesn't really control anything.
Well,
You know, at the end of the day, it's not going to have an overall impact on the neighborhood that, you know, couldn't be impacted the other way by somebody just putting an addition on or building a detached garage, you know, that's not an ADU. So I see that point.
I would also say that, to Bob's point, that part of the uniqueness of Old Town is the fact that it's all different and it's not the same. And so to start making things the same almost flies in the face of how I think of when I go down there. I don't expect to see the same thing next to each other. It's almost unusual when I do. At least I always think that the difference is different. And like Bob said, I don't want to live down there, but I like the uniqueness of it. So,
right.
Okay. I mean, I was really asking a question as much as anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the context of original town, this regulation doesn't feel appropriate, but I want public feedback on this one.
Agreed.
I agree with B.
So we want to say, let's see, what do we want to say? Probably not.
Yeah.
Or take this out or something. Probably not. Probably take
Yeah.
this out.
Yeah.
What we want. And this is why I don't want an ordinance to go to the town board without some real clarity on what we're saying anyway. But
Do we like B or no?
And B, I like the idea of it being subordinate.
I do.
I don't quite follow the visible from an adjacent street, or if that, I'm
Typically, that's a back entrance or a side entrance rather than it both front doors being on the front of the property. So
okay, so like, but if you got
it does make it difficult with a corner lot, you know, like, because I don't think you want it written that it can't be visible from. It needs to be visible from the primary frontage or something. It could be more specific than it. You know, because on a side lot, it may be appropriate for it to be on the side of the home, but just not two doors next to each other, I think is the general intent for most of these regulations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right.
I thought this.
I would be curious, I think, emergency response, like where you place address numbers and things, if our emergency responders have a strong opinion on this one. But other than that, in opposition to this, but other than that, I like this approach.
I mean, because this could, I mean, if the lot runs between two streets and the accessory dwelling unit is on the street opposite the main dwelling unit, I mean, is that another sort of situation this is supposed to address?
So if it's similar to, you know, 4th and William, where you have the duplex situation where you have one unit that accesses off the alley and one unit that accesses off of William, then you have an A and a B unit, just like you would probably here, and they're addressed accordingly. The fire district gets a notification of that, and they know that there's an A unit in the front and a B unit in the back. And, you know, so much stuff is, you know, GIS kind of based now for their responses, even that I don't know that there would be a concern. But that's why we do share this information when we create, you know, this type of additional housing or density. So, but it's good to touch base just to make sure that, you know, they're aware of it and they don't have any, you know, they want something addressed differently or signed differently when they get to the unit in order to help clarify where they need to go. That's important. So.
All right.
I feel like C would be difficult on that one. I wouldn't want to have to be the planner or the building plans examiner to have to negotiate between two property owners on this one.
And it's got that wishy-washy adequately accomplishes the same
Yeah.
purpose.
Unless others feel
Yeah, but
strongly.
it's hard to implement probably.
Yeah, so a no on that.
But this would depend on whether you're doing setbacks or not for the ADU, or wouldn't that have an impact on it too?
Yeah,
Yeah, and I would assume that you need your minimum setbacks for and in which case you'd already have, 5 feet of distance at minimum for any unit.
yeah.
So you can help me understand. So we have multiple garages that have been built. I don't know if you reviewed them or not. That are on the alley, right? They're sitting on the alley. One of them's like, right, maybe it is 5 feet back. I just might be off. Like, what is there? Like my neighbor back here. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Seems really close. And there's another one over on not William, might be William, the alley of a house that faces William. And it just seems like it's got to be closer than 5 feet. But is that what it is? 5 feet on the alley?
Depends. So I think it's greater for, I can't remember. I think it's 10 feet typically for a primary residence at least, and then I think it's 8 feet if it's detached. But for a rear setback, it's generally greater. For the 5 feet is a side setback. So again, some units in downtown or original town, excuse me, were built before the building.
No, these are within the last 10 years. Now, one of them's within the last 5. That's why I was asking. Maybe within the last 3. That's over on William. I don't know. Maybe someday we'll have time. You could walk out and look at it. I don't want to pick on the guy. I don't want to. I want to understand this because, when I look at it, if you're going to put a garage on, right? You could put a garage if they're really allowed to be that close on an alley. You put the garage on the alley, with an ADU on top, and really tuck it in tight to the alley. But yeah, so that needs to be thought of, whether we're good, bad. How we're going to handle alleys.
Right.
But, so we're saying no on this, or no? I'm sorry. We said
You're talking
yeah, so no
windows still?
on the C, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And 10.
It's another one that's just kind of written a little nebulously.
So sorry, my computer crashed. What did we decide? What did we decide?
We changed it all, Dan. Sorry. No,
I think it overheated or something. You guys are working so hard.
Yes on B, no on C.
Yeah.
You said no on B?
Yes on B, no on C.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah.
I'm on board now.
You got the A, probably not, right? Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
So outdoor areas,
I'd say, oh my God, there's no landscape.
Sort of separate fencing to separate the 2 units or something. A yard's a yard. I don't know how you differentiate one being for somebody and one being for somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to regulate that.
No.
This seems to me more like a total lot coverage issue.
Correct. I would agree.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and you might not want to, you might want to just share your space. It just depends on how you design your ADU, right? And you might not want them on your property. You may not want them on your property. You may not even want to provide the ADU outdoor space, right?
Right, and yeah, so.
It's a tough one.
How does it, if somebody builds an 8, we have, you can have 40% lot coverage at the moment, I think, can't you, Steve, if you got a single family house?
Correct. So I wouldn't think that we're adding, I wouldn't think an ADU adds to that. I think that, unless you guys feel differently, I would think that you got a 40% lot coverage. If you want to use some of that lot coverage allowance for an accessory dwelling unit, great. If you already have 40%, you're not going to get an additional 10% or whatever for an accessory dwelling unit. If you guys feel differently and you are more encouraged, if you really want to be super encouraging of these things and aren't concerned about lot coverage, but we've seen that the 40% is pretty significant. So.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yep.
If you only have 40% lot Does that include the garage, or is that just for the main dwelling?
It includes a garage.
So, I mean, that leaves you 60, I mean, almost by definition, that's going to leave you some accessible outdoor space, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, whether or not you pave it and turn it into a bunch of driveways or something like that, it's or how long your driveway is. But yeah,
To me, this is like a market issue, right? Does a renter, are you going to be able to rent it if it doesn't have outdoor space? Is it for your mother-in-law? Do you need outdoor space? Like, I don't feel like regulating this. That's my opinion.
Yeah, so it's a family member,
agree.
you'd like to share your space. So.
it's probably something that's met by default anyway, but it's
Yeah.
not necessary. So
Or not, because a lot of us don't have great landscaping, and some do.
11, I would want to lean on our public works to understand where we are with our water funds and if there's a way we could come up with maybe. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no,
I was
it's-
talking
it's
tap
a
fees.
shared,
Yeah, and then from the shared service, I agree, because then it
Yeah.
makes selling it separately
Yep.
hard to do.
And I don't mind unless the director or manager, whatever, determines such to be infeasible. I mean, if I guess that's one of those possible variances that could exist, I guess.
I think that's good language because I mean you could have a tap that's historic and smaller than what you'd actually need to serve. It may be
Yeah.
something that gets required for any addition, and you don't want an ADU to be viewed as an exception or something. So
Yeah.
it may need to be upgraded, but it probably doesn't need to be separate. So that gives some flexibility there.
Who's the director? I know this is their code, but for us, who would the director, what would the title be of that person?
Typically, it gets defaulted to the town manager. So
Got it. Okay.
or
But
somebody who appoints to make.
District, Stephen, the district, the district, Superior Metropolitan District, number 1, may have rules and regulations regarding that. So that would probably have to be looked into.
Yeah. True.
There's a district for original town.
Yeah, the Superior Metropolitan District, number 1, water and sewer.
Okay. I thought that was just absorbed with the town already, but if it applies, then we'll definitely look into it.
Right, okay.
Mobile homes.
Can you explain, I mean, I think what I'm reading is if they meet the this is weird. So if they meet the definition of manufactured home, camper, buses, trailers, does that mean they're allowed?
No,
Yes.
prohibited.
Because there's a double negative in here. There's a mobile homes not shall be prohibited. So I always struggle with double negatives. I can't get it clear in my head.
No, it's a good question.
Sorry.
I think the way this reads is anything that would be considered a manufactured home is permitted.
That's what I thought. Mobile homes not meeting the definition of manufactured homes shall be prohibited. But if they meet the definition of a manufactured home, or a camper bus, or a travel trailer, or an RV, then they would be permitted. Is that?
No, so it's manufactured homes permitted, mobile homes, campers, everything else not permitted.
That's what I read it to mean too.
Missing like a such as or including, so I think that, manufactured homes meeting the definition for a building code would be permitted, but everything else wouldn't be. So
Dan can make this look nicer, I'm sure.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of the way they wrote this either.
Oh. So we're okay. So what we're saying is, I mean, we're cool with a manufactured home. What we don't want is a mobile home, a camper bus, a travel trailer, or an RV to be considered an ADU. Is that everybody?
Right, which would follow the current regulations within. I mean, so there are some historically, permitted mobile homes out there. You wouldn't put a new one in there today that is net new that could get allowed. So they wouldn't change. I mean, it's similar to what we allow now.
Okay, so manufactured homes, okay. Yeah, I'll rewrite. All right, number 13. I don't like this one, but go ahead. 13, deed restriction before obtaining a permit. So this is basically, you're saying if you sell the unit, the ADU has to go away? Is that what?
No, it's saying, so the first part
Oh, it
saying
can't be sold separate.
sold separately.
Oh, I'm good
It's
with
just
that.
the provisions of the deed that you have to place on there. So,
Sure.
and this is somewhat separate than the owner occupied thing too. So, right, so you could still require a deed restriction even if we don't require owner occupancy, just then that this owner and any future owners understand the regulations around this.
It's binding on them, on the subsequent owners.
So
Well,
C,
right, like in this example, but we could also require a deed restriction. Like we could require a deed even if we don't require an owner occupancy, just to make sure everyone knows the regulations and that the regulations are, you know, a little more clear for any potential buyer. So I don't know if that's important or not. I mean, I think Stephen or Dan, I'd lean on you to know from a staff perspective, do you like the security of capturing through a deed restriction the whatever is in the ADU code?
I mean, I think, you know, the other ones that we've done for clients each have deed restrictions in them. And you know, it just makes it, you know, it kind of keeps the same property, you know, under these ADU restrictions, regardless of owner. So, I mean, it comes down to a preference thing, but I know that a lot of at least our clients have preferred it. I mean, we have run into some kind of issues with it. And I think we even have like a litigation that we're dealing with the deed restriction. So, I mean, I think there's, you know, potentially good and bad things about it. There's a little bit of a give and take, but overall, I think most of our clients have leaned towards deed restrictions.
I think A is really important to have in there.
I agree.
13A for sure. And I just think it's in general a good idea. And if we decide that owner occupancy isn't required, we just delete C then, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. So
but I agree. I think it's a good idea because it becomes part of your, when you have a deed restriction or something on the deed, when the sales transaction occurs, it's something that's actually given as part of the closing rather than, I mean, I don't get a lot of people that say, you know, I've read the code. I read the code when I bought my house, you know, like that hardly ever happens. So it's more like I have this house. What can I do or what can't I do?
it would be a title search, wouldn't it, Stephen?
Yeah, it would with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really important to be in there.
Yeah, I don't see anything in there. I mean, other than C, which we kind of discussed as being, you know, to be determined. That doesn't sound like things that we've kind of agreed upon already.
Yeah, if staff likes a deed restriction just to help manage this, I'm supportive of it. I don't have a problem with it at all.
Yeah, I think it just clarifies. I mean, you can't do it anyway. I mean, but I think it makes it really extra clear.
Yeah, it makes it clear when, you know, so somebody doesn't misrepresent a use when the property transfers. So,
but the use would. So now this isn't saying that the use goes away with the sale of the property, though, right? It goes away with the removal of the ADU. I mean, you can sell the property with the ADU on it, right?
Right. It would just clarify that, you know, if I bought this house, I can't subdivide it. I can't condoize it, you know, like that type of thing.
Yeah. Which makes sense. Yeah.
I can't add to that accessory dwelling unit size, you know, just.
And it allows for the deed restriction to go away upon the removal of the ADU. So if something does change, you know, where code does allow smaller lots and you decide you want to split the lots in half, then you would be allowed to keep it on there. But that's, it shall lapse upon the removal of the ADU. And it just removes this encumbrance. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good with this.
Your next you might want to work from home, you know, and like have a house and then something separate, and they don't need you know, the restriction. I mean, they could, you know, they could still have a whole, you know, bedroom and bathroom back there and just decommission the kitchen and use it as a studio or whatever workspace they want. So.
We don't have to discuss this now, but you just triggered something for me that I had on my mind a while back, Stephen, was the whole work from home change, right? And, well, yeah, you know, building another unit on your property for an office, right, for work from home, you just said that. So what if I build, right? Like today, I can't go build a carriage house on the back of my property if I have a shed and a house or a separate garage. I couldn't go build a carriage house. So, but I could build an ADU and then decide it's not an ADU anymore. And then I'd have this other building on my property for which I could work from home, which I'd like to allow people to do that.
So why couldn't you build one? Are you talking about your specific example, or you can't? I don't know. I guess I don't understand your example.
You're limited to the number of
accessory dwellings or accessory buildings.
Yeah. I mean, this is going to impact accessory buildings, right? I mean, we can't restrict somebody from building another. If we're going to allow this additional accessory building on properties for ADU purposes, we can't restrict an accessory unit being built for another purpose, like
does our code limit the number of accessory structures on a lot?
It's something we need to look at, because I mean,
I think I have one too many sheds. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a really old one on the property.
It's not something I have to look at very often, but I think that, that's where you have to make a decision. Is the intent or the purpose of the, number of outbuildings you have on a lot? And if somebody comes in for an ADU right now and we have that in place, then they would just have to remove a shed if they want one. It's as simple as that. But if you don't want that restriction, or if you're not encouraging of that restriction, then you need to, think about an allowance that exempts that, or also addresses that, you can have this and still have two outbuildings or whatever we refer to them as on your lot. So
I wouldn't mind thinking about that. I mean, it would be a bummer to have to take a shed down to, put up an ADU, but I mean, then again, I guess depending on how you build the ADU, you could build the shed replacement within it.
I think that the other thing to think about in that one, and I'd be more, I guess, from a planning perspective, amenable to not discouraging, like if you're getting dinged for having a detached garage versus an attached garage, I don't necessarily think a detached garage should count against you, because the same impact is having it attached, and it adds to the character. And, generally those things are used off the alley and, kind of would have been what we encourage to those design guidelines. So I think that there's probably some teeth to that angle of the argument, more than maybe exempting accessory dwelling units from a code. But that's something we'll need to look at more.
Yeah, just came to mind. Cool. Now, is there anything that anybody thinks we haven't talked about?
Yes, short-term versus long-term rentals, the Airbnb.
Oh, right. Okay, good. Thanks for bringing that up.
I think the short-term rental conversation, are we planning to have that as a town, or is that on like the town board's radar to talk about more broadly?
Not that I'm aware of. Martin's response was we don't prohibit them. That Rock Creek, however, addresses them separately from us. So I think that, I don't know how they address them, but they address them. So
I feel like they're allowed.
Yeah, I believe it was one of the Board of Trustees meetings that I sat in on. It was brought up. I'm not recalling exactly. I think it's something that they're possibly considering, or kind of bouncing around.
I don't think it's reached the level of being problematic to where they felt like they needed to act on it. So, but if, we don't get, and, Martin hears more about our code enforcement stuff than I do, but if it reaches a level of concern or whatever, that, people are abusing that, or, whatever, then I think that we would address it differently. But I don't know that it's reached that threshold. I certainly haven't heard much about them being problematic yet.
I think my initial thought on this code then would be to stay silent on it and have it be regulated similar to all the other properties, but I'd be interested in public feedback to see if we should restrict it.
Or allow it. I mean, well, yeah.
Or allow it, right, to deviate then, yeah.
To deviate from being silent, yeah. What is the general rule, Dan, on being silent on things? Does that assume permitted?
I mean, I guess not necessarily, but yeah, I mean, typically it means that the town wouldn't be able to.
sorry, don't a lot of homeowners associations and things like that regulate that too?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I guess the way it would work is if, you know, if HOA was enforcing something along those lines, if the town had some kind of provision, you know, typically that's gonna, you know, that's gonna preempt any of the HOA, you know, regulations. But yeah, I mean, usually when it's silent, you know, likely it's probably that they're, you know, that they can, you know what I mean? I guess is kind of the,
There's nothing preventing you.
yeah, if there's nothing preventing them, I mean, it would, you know, if the HOA is preventing them, you know, they'd have to comply with that. If the town had some kind of restriction, they'd have to comply with that. But, you know, I guess in the absence, yeah.
It's difficult to regulate without a definition, and I don't even think we have a definition for it. So, you know, if we had a definition, and then we could, you know, if it's not permitted, then it's not necessarily prohibited either. But I don't think we've decided to take a stance one way or the other really on it. So until we do,
It is what it is.
It would seem inconsistent for us to put something in here when the town, and restrict it from where other places in the town could or couldn't. So I agree with Lisa to say, be silent on it, leave it out. And if the town decides to restrict it, we can restrict everything and not just individual.
Yeah, it starts to get tricky because then then it's primary residence too, or what if you want to do a house trade and go to Europe for 2 months, right? You know, I mean, it can get messy.
Yeah.
I think there's, I mean, if we're talking about doing ADUs for original town versus the whole town, then I think we could actually have a different rule about it, because nobody else has accessory dwelling units.
Are you gonna mess with the primary house too, or is it only in the ADU?
It would be in one or the other. I mean, if the owner occupier is in the ADU, then it would presumably apply to the main house.
But what if I wanted to go do I wanted to go rent a house in Europe for 2 months and rent my house out for 2 months or a month, or that's probably slightly different than an Airbnb where it's a day or a night.
Yeah, I'm really thinking more in terms of people coming in for 1 or 2 days or maybe a week or something like that. That's, I mean, then it's a question of how short is short.
Yeah. I'm inclined to leave it be and let the board deal with it.
I agree.
that's one of those things I think would have some impact on owner occupancy. If you have two VRBOs or Airbnbs that are going on for both units at the same time, then I think that, you know, maybe neighbors feel differently. But if you're the owner that's doing an Airbnb for your accessory dwelling unit, then maybe, you know,
That's true.
Yeah, maybe there's an incentive for an incentive for owner occupancy rather than preventing it. Take away, allow them, you know, if you live there, you can do a couple more things than if you don't. Because you could make the restrictions a little deeper if it's not owner occupied, right? You could do some things.
That's an interesting approach.
Just a thought. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Because I agree with you. Having two Airbnbs being on, that could get annoying to the neighbors.
Yeah, it's just it becomes very transient, you know, like if the owner's there, I think you're watching that and making sure that, you know, like, you know, it's being kept up and all that. Whereas I just feel like if somebody came in and went from my neighbor's house all the time, you know, like it was different people, you just feel a little bit different about it. So, and whether or not that's a perceived thing and real or just a perceived thing, and, you know, probably it just takes one. Your odds become greater to have a bad experience. So.
You also have to manage it. Somebody has to manage the property. You can't have nightly Airbnbs and not have somebody managing the property. I mean, it's got to be cleaned.
Yeah, I would think the condition of the property would probably be maintained to a better state just to maintain its marketability. But I do think it could be annoying to always have people coming and going and not knowing where to park, and, you know, I'm inclined to leave it out, but ask the question when we have our public kind of review.
Well, I'm good with that. All right. So what's anything else that were on anybody's mind related to this? Stephen or Dan, have we missed anything obvious? I'm assuming Golden's code is pretty decent. So.
They seem to be doing it, have been doing it for a while, so I think they've worked out some of the kinks already. So I think it's a good standard to go from.
Okay.
Look at anything from California. California's been doing this for a while. The city of Santa Cruz is one of the, people at the forefront of this. So if you guys have the time to look at, one of the jurisdictions, I should say, have the time to look at other jurisdictions, and have different insights maybe when we have another work session, or again, and that's the next direction that do you guys think, Dan, you've given Dan enough that you want to at least schedule this for a public meeting so you can act on it if you want to. You can always choose not to, if you feel like certain kinks still need to be worked out, or do you want to just commit to another work session?
I'm feeling good about trying a public meeting, and if we can't work it out, we can't work it out. If we can, then we'll
okay
forward. But I'm still kind of inclined to wait for the new board, but I don't know. We'll see.
I think we have a little bit of time though by the time we do a public meeting and then it gets on the board's calendar. Dan, I would say I feel like we probably have answered all the questions enough to draft the ordinance that we could go ahead and bring it back at a public meeting, unless you feel like when you're drafting it, this is raising other questions and you want to bring it back as a work session.
No, I think I got a lot of the right input, and as Stephen pointed out, I think this is a good starting point. The Golden ordinance. So I think that covers a lot of I think it's pretty comprehensive. So I think I've been taking notes kind of throughout. I have a good sense of what you all are looking for, and I think I'm prepared to put something together and let you take a look at it.
And Stephen, can you? I'd be interested in some of the setback information, and I assume there are going to be elements to our existing code that maybe need to be adjusted because of this, or no?
No, I would assume so. I would assume so too. So I don't know at what point we that really should get folded in, like once we have something baked and then we know what's done, or like maybe a cursory look at it just to kind of highlight the things that look like they would be issues or potentially be issues would be a good thing. And then a second pass later once we hammer out what we're actually recommending or making a decision on.
Does that then indicate that maybe we shouldn't have a public meeting for our next meeting? Should we skip one, or should we have one more powwow here, or what?
I think the context I guess I would provide, that's totally up to you guys, but the context I would provide is just like, we're kind of at this point where, we're at the end of September, getting to, the new board is probably not going to be likely until the first of the year or something. So we have time. Like, I don't want to wait too long before this comes back to you, but I don't necessarily know that we need to schedule anything for the first, hearing in October either. But then again, like what we're looking at, I guess in my mind is, we have a meeting on October 20th, I believe it is, the second meeting in October that you guys will hear the development application. So we could wait till, November to have a meeting. Then we're thinking, I think that the first scheduled meeting in November is election day, so that won't happen. We'll have to schedule, so like, do you want it sooner or later? Like, because I think we could schedule it for early October if Dan thinks he can get it done, or we schedule it for the second meeting in November, and then we deal with 2 months of lapsing in between, which may be longer than you guys want in terms of it being fresh in your minds.
I think we are mostly in agreement on everything here, with just a couple things that need to be discussed and hammered out. And I feel like we could come back in November and give Dan time to do this, and then just let this float into the new board. That's others. I don't know how others feel, but.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah, I think that, Stephen, I would just kind of see where you guys land on timing. If you guys, how your staff load's going and time to develop the ordinance as far as when it comes back.
Okay. I think giving Dan more time would be better than having this 2-week turnaround or whatever, so.
Yeah, I don't think we need to rush it.
And it gives you time to look for stuff that.
Yeah, no, I think it would be give me time too to discuss with Stephen and kind of come to a final version that I can present to you.
Great.
Okay.
All right.
Good deal.
Thanks for a really productive meeting.
Yeah.
Great meeting.
Nothing else. We don't have anything else on the agenda but adjourn, you think, right? Yeah, cool. All right.
We have nobody.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
I think we're okay then. Okay.
Yep. Go.
All right. Thank you guys.
All right.
Stay safe.
Yep.
Nice seeing everyone.
Good night.